Innalillahi ya Allah. Ini nggak disungkas, ini kita maju ya.
This chapel is located in the Arlington, Virginia cemetery and is definitely one of the most haunted churches in the world. The Arlington Public Library writes, the Old Post Chapel was commissioned by Major George Patton Jr. in 1933 when he toured the chapels on the grounds of the Walter Reed Hospital. Patton told Post Commander Colonel Kenyon Joyce that the new chapel should combine the functions of a principal chapel with those of a mortuary chapel in one building. Workers broke ground in February 1934 and the chapel was officially dedicated on April 21st, 1935, where it was known for its attractive spire and intricate stained glass windows. The chapel serves as a place of worship for the community, a wedding chapel, and a place of final honors for those laid to rest at Arlington National Cemetery. Many fallen service members have lain in wait in the Old Post Chapel for their final trip, and it's allowed family members to grieve in private. So it's unsurprising that many active duty service members have reported hearing disembodied voices and footsteps in the chapel when they've been there alone. Locked doors have unlocked themselves and opened on their own. Canine units patrolling with service people will refuse to go into the building and bark at the door, especially at night. And visitors describe a young grief-stricken woman dressed in white who waits for her sweetheart. Rumors are that she threw herself from the bell tower, which remains locked to this day. So what really sticks out to me there, guys, about that excerpt is the canine units. Dogs not wanting to go into this place because they're scared. You ever notice how animals can get skittish when a big storm is coming or something like that? Well, they sense these things and they pick up on stuff that humans just don't. I personally imagine that they probably have a similar ability with spiritual presences or anything of that nature. Also, considering how many people have been laid to rest here, it's no wonder why this place would be as haunted as people are claiming it to be. If you're going, then definitely pray before entering, but don't be scared to just avoid it altogether either. Number 4 on this list is the Abbaye de Mortemer. This abbey was a whole thriving community at one point, but now it's a total ruin of its former self. For the purposes of this video, we're going to be zeroing in on the place of worship that they had at this spot and looking at how haunted that is. And let me tell you, it's pretty freaking haunted. In the 15th century, this place was booming and one of the brightest communities in France. It really looked like it was on the come up. But fast forward 200 years later and things had really fallen off. Greed had taken over and the men who were in charge were far more interested in their personal gain than the growth of this place. People started leaving and things started to wear and tear with time. Eventually there got to a point where there were only a handful of monks still there living under the leaky roof of this abbey. Well, in 1790 they met a very grim and sick fate. This was the time of the French Revolution and religion was very much out of favor. A group of revolutionists swept through the area and believing that the monks had some sort of treasure hidden here, they took them into the cellar and they killed them. The manner to which these men died was brutal. Because of this, it's believed that their spirit still clings to the ruins of this place. Future owners of this location had many run-ins with ghosts and even had to perform some exorcisms in their time being there. There have also been reports of werewolves and other demonic creatures here. The monks are by far the most spotted poltergeists though. The crazy thing is that apparently they aren't that evil. One would think that after their life was so ruthlessly stripped away from them that they would harbor some anger, but apparently they don't. If you do make it out here, then I recommend you pray not only as a form of safety, but also as a sign of respect for the souls of the monks who still live here. Number 3 on this list is the Aquia Episcopal Church. Heading back to Virginia with this one, this church is located in a place called Stafford. The church itself is rather beautiful and looks super unsuspecting. Some of the other churches on this list in our previous part just gave me the vibe that something was up, but this one doesn't. The outside and the inside make you feel homey and very safe. Problem is, this isn't the case. Only in your state writes, one of the most famous mysteries associated with the church is that of the golden-haired skeleton. No one knew about the death of the woman who was murdered inside Acquia until her skeleton was later discovered in the Belphegor, and her hair was later discovered in the Belfry, and her hair was still intact, just as blonde as the day she died. At the time, the church had lost funding due to the Revolutionary War, and that might have been the reason why no one discovered her body until later. The event seems equally tragic and mysterious. It's been said that bloodstains from the murder remained on the floorboard for nearly 100 years until it was replaced altogether with concrete. Not so surprisingly, many ghost stories worked their way through the community after the skeleton was discovered. Many parishioners refused to set foot in the church after dark. In the 1900s, people decided to seek evidence of hauntings for themselves. Many returned with chilling tales of having encountered an unfriendly presence. Even today, there's plenty of paranormal activity associated with the church grounds. Many visitors have reported hearing footsteps running through the graveyard accompanied by the sound of a violent struggle. Others claim to see the figure of a young golden-haired woman peering from the balcony window. So clearly this church has got a pretty dark history to it. It's said that the skeleton that was found was of a woman who was by some men prior to the Revolutionary War. The church then closed for the war and reopened after it, so her body would have been stuck here decomposing for probably decades. It's no wonder that her soul hung on to this place and refused to let go. It's honestly really very sad if you ask me, because from all the reports that I read, her ghost isn't evil, it's just a lonely one. It's clear by the way she holds herself that she doesn't want to be stuck in this purgatory place, she just is. Similar to our monks, you should pray as a sign of respect before entering this church if you do ever go. Number 2 on this list is the Borley Rectory. This is sometimes referred to as the most haunted place in all of England, so it definitely deserves a spot on our list. The Rectory, which for those who don't know is a Church of England, was built in 1863. For a bit over 50 years, nothing out of the ordinary or spectacular happened here. It was just a normal rectory. The horror stories didn't take place until 1929. A journalist named V.C. Wall was with a photographer in the woods nearby the rectory taking pictures one evening when they saw the weirdest thing. Apparently from the outside, the rectory looked as if it had a light on within it, but the second that you walked inside, that light disappeared. This phenomenon baffled both of the men, and they thought that something paranormal might be happening. Wall also reportedly said that he saw a nun that evening, or what looked to be the ghost of a nun, walking in the garden. After they told people about this story, some ghost hunters came forward and provided an explanation. Back in the 1300s, there was a monastery here. At this monastery, a monk had a relationship with a nun. This was found out and resulted in deadly punishment for both people. The nun got it particularly bad though, because she was bricked up alive in the convent walls and left there to die. The story from V.C. Wall brought this place to the public's attention, but apparently ghost stories have been told here from long before as well. Sightings of paranormal creatures have been seen and talked about dating back before the rectory was even built on this land. Clearly this whole area is just inherently cursed, and this rectory just happens to be built on it. Strange rapping sounds, bells ringing, objects moving and flying around without anybody touching them. These are all very common sightings at the Borley Rectory. The ghost of this nun is also a regular character here, making herself known to newcomers quite often. If you happen to get really lucky, then you may also see a ghost coach with 2 horses and a headless coachman. Maybe lucky is kind of the wrong word to use here, but this sighting is a lot rarer and doesn't come out to everybody. Either way, the Borley Rectory is way too haunted and should probably just be avoided at all costs. And finally, number 1 on this list is St. Paul's Episcopal Church. This church and the grounds that it resides on is haunted by a number of different ghouls. It's located in the Florida Keys and has seen many a tragedy in its days. Whether it be a hurricane, a great fire, or other natural disasters, this church has pretty much been through it all. Ghosts and Gravestones writes, the most well-known haunt of St. Paul's Church Cemetery is that of a man in 19th century attire who appears as a flimsy white vapor. Many believe that it's the spirit of Fleming himself who seems upset. Is it because his gravesite was disturbed so many times throughout the years by all the reconstructions? Nobody knows for sure, but his apparition has startled many. Another spirit that seems to roam the graveyard is a sea captain who appears to take great pleasure in frightening visitors. And beware of the ghost of a man who was legendary for driving the pirates out of Key West. His spirit is angry and ready to taunt, and those who've encountered his apparition say that even on a day when the weather is calm, violent winds come rushing through a tree that sits right next to his grave. John Fleming, the ghost that they talk about there, was the initial owner of this land and died on the property. His wife donated said land to be used for the church, but apparently her husband's spirit never left. The story behind the sea captain is unknown. Why he's come here or what happened to him is all a mystery. One thing is for sure though, he is a very dangerous ghost, and many visitors have reported being assaulted and terrified by him. This is definitely one of those churches that I would again avoid altogether, but if you do go, then make sure you say a prayer before entering.
Coming in at number 5, we have the Vatican Secret Archives. The Vatican Secret Archives is considered to be the world's most secure building, but why is it so locked down? What secrets are being hidden behind the walls? The amount of history located there is immense. The Vatican Secret Archives is home to the largest collection of Catholic books, documents, and doctrine in the world. It boasts letters from well-known figures such as Abraham Lincoln and Mary, Queen of Scots. It contains 53 miles of shelving with 35,000 volumes in the selective catalogue alone. The archives also include state papers, correspondence, account books, and many other documents the church has acquired over the centuries. Naturally, many people have speculated that there must be secret documents amongst the 50+ miles of shelving in the Vatican's archives. Of course, no one is allowed to browse the archives, which makes it even more mysterious. Only select scholars, academics, and journalists are allowed to enter, and this is a rule that will never likely change. Many believe that the Pope and many people around him keep very classified and secret information in the archives that they don't want the world knowing. One theory is that the archives contains correspondence between St. Paul and Emperor Nero pertaining to Jesus' existence and his biological descendants, and some believe that the Vatican may be hiding proof that Jesus did in fact exist or didn't exist at all. Next is the confirmation and evidence of alien life forms such as extraterrestrial skulls. Some claim that in 1998 skulls with elongated heads and small faces resembling aliens were found underneath the Vatican. Ever since, the Vatican has kept all evidence of aliens a secret to not discredit Christianity. Another secret being held from the world is the Grand Grimoire, which is an alleged medieval book that is believed to possess immense powers. It was written in the 16th century by Honorius of Thebes, who claimed to be possessed by the devil himself. In the book, it has instructions on how to make magic talismans and amulets, how to make magic spells, and even how to summon demons, and even offers instructions on how to summon the devil himself and make a deal with him. If the Vatican is keeping world-shattering secrets in its archives, we may never know due to its high level of security, and it only being accessible to a slight few. So our questions of what is really in there may never be answered. In at number 4, we have the Church of Rome, destruction of important Jewish historical documentation. In 1415, the Church of Rome took an extraordinary step to destroy all knowledge of the two 2nd century Jewish books that is said contained the true name of Jesus Christ. The anti-pope Benedict XIII firstly signaled out for condemnation a secret Latin treatise called Ma Jesu, and then issued instructions to destroy all of the copies of the Book of Alexei. No editions of these writings now publicly exist, but church archives recorded that they were once in popular circulation and known to early presbyters. Knowledge of these writings survived from quotations made by Bishop Hippolytus of Rome and Saint Epiphanius of Salamis, along with references in some early traditions of the Talmud of Palestine and Babylonia. The rabbinic fraternity once held the destroyed manuscripts with great reference, for they were comprehensive original records reporting of the life of Rabbi Jesus. Later, in a similar manner, Pope Alexander VI ordered all copies of Talmud destroyed. The Council of the Inquisition required as many Jewish writings as possible to burn with the Spanish Grand Inquisitor. Thomas de Torquemada, responsible for the elimination of 6,000 volumes at Salamanca. In 1550, Cardinal Carafa, the Inquisitor General, repealed all previous permission for priests to read the Talmud, which he said contained hostile stories about Jesus Christ, leading him to seize every copy he could find in Rome and burn them. Solomon Romano also burnt many thousands of Hebrew scrolls, and in 1559 every Hebrew book in the city of Prague was confiscated. The mass destruction of Jewish books included hundreds of copies of the Old Testament and caused irreversible loss of many original handwritten documents. The mass destruction of Jewish writings, the church overlooked 2 particular British documents that still exist to this day in the British Museum. Coming in at number 3, we have the Orphans of Duplessis. In the 1930s and 1940s in Quebec City, city was marred by unprecedented acts of corruption and repression due to a conservative revolution better known as the Great Darkness, which was led by Premier Maurice Duplessis, and many of the acts were involving the Catholic Church. In 1940, the Duplessis government and along with the Catholic Church began to diagnose orphan children with mental problems, even though these children were perfectly healthy. Due to this, thousands of orphan children were sent to a psychiatric institution of the church so that the church could receive a government subsidy for the treatment of these children. Unfortunately, this was a reality for so many because mental health wasn't as widely known as today, and it was unknown how to treat those suffering back then. At this time, many orphanages were converted into asylums for children, and more than 20,000 were misdiagnosed and imprisoned in asylums so that the Catholic Church could earn more money. According to reports, many of these children weren't orphans at all, but children coming from single mothers who were forcibly taken into church custody, and they didn't admit children out of wedlock. The people forced to be involved in this were subjected to nightmares, including drug testing and other medical experiments like electric shock therapy. In the 1990s, almost 3,000 survivors of the Duplessis orphan scandal revealed the horrific events they had to go through, but the government made a sad excuse of a settlement with the victims, and the Catholic Church remained silent to stifle the scandal. In at number 2 we have Joan of Arc. Most people know the story of Joan of Arc. She is mostly considered a hero of France for her role during the war. She is now considered a saint, but the Catholic Church hated her. She claimed that she was receiving messages from God, instructions on what she should do to help her people. This angered many higher-ranking officials within the church. Joan saw her first vision around the age of 13 in 1425. The figure she identified as Saint Michael, surrounded by angels, appeared in her garden. After receiving the vision, she wept as she wanted to go with him. Throughout her life, she continued to be visited and given messages from the Lord. By 1428, Joan's visions told her she must leave her home and go to France. Since then, she gained followers and support in her fight to recover France from English domination. The Catholic Church denounced her visions and set out to take her down. In 1430, Joan was captured. She was put on trial for heresy, even though Joan was a devout Christian. They gave Joan as many charges as they could, hoping she would be found guilty of at least one of them. The military were relieved of her capture. They believed her to have supernatural powers. They feared her as it was not typical for women to wield such power and command. One of the most well-known charges against Joan was that she wore men's clothing, something apparently illegal back then. In reality, this came from the fact that she wore armor while in enemy territory, something not seen as being ladylike for the time. The trial was not conventional for the time. It was clear no matter what she did, they were determined to find her guilty. Although she was impressive during the trial, she was ultimately found guilty. She was found guilty of heresy and sentenced to death. She was to be burned at the stake. Joan is seen as a hero and a saint today. The Catholic Church tries to distance themselves from her mistreatment. And finally, in at number 1 we have the Vatican's quest for aliens. It might surprise you to know that the Catholic Church has a keen interest in aliens. They hold a conference each year to talk about astrobiology. If you haven't heard that term before, it's a term they created to make their meetings about aliens seem more legitimate. The Vatican has often defended itself in the public about their interest in extraterrestrial. As they often state, evolution is not something they believe in. You would assume they also didn't believe in aliens. The Vatican even has its own team of scientists looking into the existence of these beings and attempting to make contact. The chief astronomer stated, "There is no conflict between believing in God and in the possibility of extraterrestrial brothers, perhaps more evolved than humans." He went on to explain that you cannot put limits on God's creative freedom, so it makes sense after creating Earth he would go to create other beings. Some even believe that humans are lost sheep of the universe, and we need to find the more evolved of God's creations. All of this would not be such a surprise if they hadn't condemned science since the creation of the church. In the 17th century, they condemned the astronomer Galileo for insisting that the Earth revolved around the sun. It seems they had progressed in some of their beliefs since then. Some believe that they spent a lot of money on their exploration into space and have even discovered a few things that they are keeping to themselves. Some historians believe that within the Vatican secret archive there is evidence of contact with extraterrestrials. It is not known why they would keep this information from the world. Do they want to use it to further their beliefs, or maybe they don't consider everyone to be worthy? We do know there are stories of communication with other beings, but the information is mostly kept with the church. In 1917, 3 children saw the Virgin Mary, who gave them a telepathic message. The message was that we are not alone on the planet. They warned that humanity needs to prepare for their return. The Catholic Church censored these messages. The only person who knew the full content of the message was the Pope, who refused to release the details of all 3. This is just one instance of messages received on Earth that have been held by the Vatican for years. It is believed they have no intention to release this information. The archive is heavily guarded. Who knows what could be hidden within their findings?
Number 5 on this list is the Lady of Guadalupe Church. This church is located in New Orleans and is known to the locals as being one of the most haunted spots in the whole city. This location hasn't always acted as a place of worship, but for a long time was a chapel that you really didn't want to end up at. That's because for the longest time it was actually called the Old Mortuary Church. As I'm sure that you can probably guess, the crowd that entered this place wasn't the liveliest. In fact, using the word live to describe them is just flat out incorrect. New Orleans was hit hard many a time with epidemics, with yellow fever being especially bad. There were times during the city's history where the dead were too many to handle and they had to go somewhere. Enter in the Old Mortuary Church. Thousands upon thousands of bodies have went through these doors over the years. In fact, for the longest time, the only people this place saw were the pastors who were here and the countless dead. Everyday citizens were too scared to come here for fear of catching the disease and wouldn't even risk going to see their departed loved ones. Obviously, all this death has left its ghostly mark. Eventually, it was turned into a full-fledged church that people attend, but not before the spiritual damage had been done. Nowadays, the spirits of some of those who died during this harsh period in New Orleans history still haunt the area. Glowing orbs have been seen by those who frequent the church floating around at nighttime. Subtle and faint moans can be heard echoing throughout the walls, as if the moans themselves were wind blowing through the church. The ghost of a man has said to approach people from time to time claiming he needs help and that he was never sick to begin with. This is definitely one of those churches who's seen its fair share of tragedy over the years, and it shows. However, believe it or not, it may not be the most haunted church in New Orleans, but more on that later. Number 4 on this list is St. Helena's Chapel of Ease. This chapel is located in South Carolina and is a ruin of its former self. A website all about Beaufort, South Carolina writes, "The chapel was destroyed in a horrendous forest fire that happened after the Civil War. Today, the ruins of the chapel and a graveyard remain. The vault still remains out of order to this very day. The planters left St. Helena with the arrival of Union forces in 1861, and the church never regained its stature. Some stories relate that Union soldiers used it for services during the war, as well as Northerners who came to the area after the war to educate and train the former slave population. The door of the Fripp's vault was ruined by the soldiers, and at some point it was decided to brick up the entrance. According to the story, workmen did a very good job of sealing the vault, only to return the following day to find the bricks removed and neatly stacked beside the mausoleum. This had occurred many times. Convinced that the supernatural was at work, the job remained unfinished. Local authorities had assured that no one had been in the area the previous night long enough to complete such a task. Today, the vault remains empty. The door is half sealed by bricks. One might find the experience of looking into the vacant vault more than a bit unsettling, if not downright eerie. Ever since that moment, regular ghostly sightings have been reported here. A woman dressed in 18th century clothing carrying a child through the graveyard is one of the most frequent apparitions that takes form. People have also talked about hearing people singing here even though they'll be completely by themselves. Usually these songs sound like church songs and are quite beautiful actually. Also, just a general feeling of uneasiness has been reported at this spot very often. This place clearly has a very strong spiritual presence, and I'd highly recommend giving a prayer before entering it. Number 3 on this list is Nidaros Cathedral. Located in Norway, this is referred to by locals as the most important Norwegian cathedral and also the most haunted. Taking a look at this thing on the outside, it's certainly very beautiful, but also gives me some serious haunted vibes. And those vibes are well founded. The church was finished being built in 1300 and is directly in the center of the city of Trondheim. It's certainly been around for a large part of Norway's history, however the hauntings at this church have been pretty recent relative to how long it's been around. It all started in 1924 when Bishop Mary Gleditch saw something pretty scary and gruesome. The ghost of a monk who had a massive slash directly across his neck. This monk has been spotted haunting the church ever since, but the weird thing is, nobody knows why. Historians have combed through Norway's history and can't seem to find a time that any order of monks would have stayed at this church. Now at the end of the day, this doesn't mean that having a ghost monk is impossible by any means. It's totally possible that a singular monk just happened to be at this church for some reason and through some tragedy died, or by the nature of that cut was potentially... Whatever his reasoning for being there, he certainly is. Many visitors have spotted him, and some have said that they've seen him playing the organ in the church before. Number 5. Oliver Plunkett's head. Now, in the other 2 videos, we talked about the head of St. Catherine of Siena, and we also talked about St. John the Baptist and how many heads he may or may not have had scattered across the world, and I'm not one to break tradition, so I thought for part 3 I would include a third holy saintly severed head, this time belonging to Oliver Plunkett. A notable difference between the 2 other severed heads is that this one is probably the most disgusting one we've included on these lists. I know these are all holy relics, but let me just say, out of context, this is absolutely horrifying and looks like it's straight out of a grindhouse horror movie that you'd find in a dirty basket somewhere. Oliver Plunkett, before becoming a head, was an Irish Catholic archbishop who was a victim of the Popish plot. Now, if you're not up to date on your Catholicism, that's a whole other video worth of explaining. I don't know much about the Popish plot. I'm not the guy to do that for you. But the short version is that it was a conspiracy falsely alleging that there was a plot against the Protestant king Charles II. Oliver Plunkett happened to end up on the receiving end of something really bad. Namely, he was executed, which is pretty bad. But they really went out of their way to destroy Oliver Plunkett, his public image, his body. They called his praising of the Roman Catholic Church high treason, and his punishment was a slow and arduous death. He was hung, drawn, and finally quartered. And just in case there were any odds of him pulling through on a miraculous recovery, as a final effort, they yeeted his head into a fire, where it was rescued by a friend of Plunkett. I'd like to think I would do that for my friends. Well, after being recovered, the head was rescued and stored hidden away in a nunnery, eventually brought to Ireland in 1995, where he's now kept on display in the National Shrine to the Saint. He was canonized for his troubles, and he is the first new Irish saint in about 700 years. It's high time for some new blood, I think. So, you can go, you can pay your respects to him, and maybe offer him some skin cream, because that skin's looking a little dry. And if you're looking for more creepy videos on weird relics or all sorts of strange things, Top 5 Scary has all of that and then some. If there's something scary, the odds are pretty good we've got a video or 2 on it. And if you haven't already, subscribe, hit that bell for more videos every single day. But do that at the end of this video, okay? We got way more weird Catholic relics coming up for you. Number 4, St. Teresa's hand. Now, if you've watched our other videos on this subject, then no doubt you're already very familiar with the practice of making remnants of saints into relics. Now, something that's directly from a saint is called a first-class relic. That means it's something that came off of their body, you know? Their hair, their fingernails, a vial of their fluids, or in the case of the lovely St. Teresa, her whole hand. Encased in a beautiful, ornate golden reliquary with gems all over the knuckles, and the editors are goofing off because that's just a picture of the Infinity Gauntlet from Avengers Endgame. Wait, that's what it really looks like. Yeah, it seems that Marvel Studios was more than inspired by the incorruptible St. Teresa's hand when designing the weapon that would give Thanos the power to wipe out half the universe. Throw a comparison pic of them side by side, they're almost indistinguishable. I'm not 100% certain if there's any symbolism or connection there, but I'm sure St. Teresa would love to know she was involved. She was a huge fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and all the things they do. When St. Teresa of Avila passed away, the sisters of her convent buried her with the hopes of keeping her holy body with them. 9 months later, she was exhumed, only to discover that her body was intact. She hadn't decayed at all. That's why they thought she was incorruptible. Now, I'm not sure I totally follow the logic here, but after they discovered her body was incorruptible, they took her hand off and put it into this golden Infinity Gauntlet thing, as a way of inviting people to get closer to God through the saint's body. Now, this might not seem appealing to you, but there's a surprising demand for this relic. Near the end of the Spanish Civil War, General Francisco Franco had the hand removed from the convent and allegedly kept it close by, and if some of the wilder rumors are true, he would keep it by his pillow for good luck. You really gotta hand it to him, he was a devout follower of the faith. Today, you can find the hand in Iglesia de Nuestra Señora de la Merced in Ronda, Andalusia, and you don't even have to rip a stone out of the Vision's forehead to get a good look at this gauntlet. Number 3, the Veil of Veronica. Now, on these lists of holy relics, we've had all sorts of strange things. We've had fingernails, teeth, dried up hands, we got milk coming up later. All things that have come from the body. Well, this next one is no different. It's the Veil of Veronica, and to put it gently, it's a sweat rag that's a few thousand years old. Probably one of the most pungent odors on the planet. Imagine every gym locker room you've ever been in times 1,000. When Jesus carried the cross, bruised and beaten, there was one person among the crowds who saw fit to help him out a little. Veronica wiped Jesus' face with this rag, and miraculously his face transferred onto the rag like it was silly putty on the funny papers. Now, as an outsider, I thought this is what the Shroud of Turin was. That was the wrapping used to wrap Jesus after his death, so the thing I'm learning is that Jesus left an imprint of his face on just about any surface he touched. You give him a hug, have his face on the shoulder of your shirt for the rest of your life as a sacred artifact. Now, the Veil of Veronica is hard to nail down hard, concrete facts on. It's never been officially canonized as a relic of the church, and is only alleged to exist. It's claimed to be owned at St. Peter's in Rome, although this particular relic is not on public display anywhere. Probably for the best. Honestly don't know if I want to see a 2,000-year-old sweat stain. The ones underneath my shirts are bad enough. Now, it might sound like I'm being disparaging, referring to this relic multiple times as a sweat rag or a sweat stain, but I would like to offer this. The Latin name for the veil is sudarium. Sudarium literally translates to sweat cloth, so even the official churchly terminology for this relic acknowledges that it's just a stinky rag that has some sweat on it, but a holy stinky rag that has some sweat on it. Number 2, Mother Mary's milk. We're gonna do our best to get through this, I promise. Mother's milk might be my favorite Red Hot Chili Peppers album, it's my favorite character on The Boys, and it might just be one of the oddest relics on a series of odd relics that's all the way to part 3. Took a lot of restraint to not put this in the first 2, but we're on part 3, so here it is now. As incredibly odd as it may sound, the Virgin Mary's milk is considered a relic of the Catholic Church. I hope they've been keeping that in the fridge, lest it spoils. Does holy milk spoil? Is everything I've said in this video profoundly heretical? There is a church called the Church of Milk Grotto, built outside Bethlehem. The history goes that the Madonna and child had taken refuge in this cave, and while she was feeding, milk spilled outwards and blessed the stone of the cave, turning it completely white. Now, the church serves as a popular shrine for women who are struggling with fertility, who hope that the lasting aura and presence of the Virgin Mary will bless them. There's a legend that goes with it. Saint Bernard, the saint, not the big dog that has his tongue hanging out, was devoted to the Mother Mary. And one day, he was praying at a statue of the Madonna, and he asked it to give him some sign, some proof that she was a mother. I guess the statue has like an odd sense of humor because it sprayed milk onto Saint Bernard. Depending on the variation of the story, either his eye or in his mouth. I saw a lot of really interesting paintings depicting this scene, and editors, I hope you're having so much fun trying to find photos for this one. I am so sorry. Truly, rest in peace your search history. In the Middle Ages, vials of the milk were sold and transported all over Europe. For what purpose, I could not tell you. These days, the Church of Milk Grotto sells a limestone powder made from the stone walls of the grotto, meant to be dissolved in a drink and consumed. Kind of like Crystal Light, but it's holy milk. Probably heals all that ails, and it's a good source of calcium, perhaps. And number 1, the Holy Prepuce. This is going to be the one that takes the channel down. You have no idea the restraint it's taken me to only be bringing this up now in part 3 of strange relics. This is probably the strangest relic of them all. We'll do our best to discuss this with reverence and also somehow figure out how to stay within content guidelines. Editors, best of luck. When Jesus was born, on his 8th day, a small piece of his skin was removed in a traditional ritual performed on Jewish men when they're born. Okay? Are you sort of following along with what I'm saying here? This particular part of the body that I can't quite mention that was removed at birth was an immensely holy relic to the Catholic Church called the Holy Prepuce. Now, the very bizarre part regarding the history of the Holy Prepuce isn't just that it exists at all, it's how much trouble one bit of skin would cause. You see, the prepuce first pops up in the year 800, when Charlemagne gave it to Pope Leo III on December 25th, making it one of the oddest Christmas gifts ever given in human history. From here, it stayed until 1527. Now, when Rome was sacked, a German soldier stole the prepuce and tried to keep it for himself until it was eventually recovered again and became the centerpiece of the village of Calcutta, where it was seen as the most exciting thing to happen in a while. It was like a celebrity showed up to the village. It was this great, big, important deal. They had a part of the body of the Savior. All manner of miracles were reported to have been the result of the Holy Prepuce. However, several other churches, villages, priests all claimed that they had the true Holy Prepuce, and any other ones you might have heard of out there were false. This problem became rampant, and in the early 1900s, the church wanted to wash their hands of the Holy Prepuce entirely and outright forbade any discussion of it in church matters. It was actually an excommunicable offense to so much as bring up the Prepuce, meaning this video is pure heresy. In 1983, the Prepuce was stolen from the church in Calcutta. Where is it now? Where did it go? Absolutely no one knows. No one's fessed up. You know, if you took it, I think now's a good time to just admit you did it. But if they're ever looking for a plot line for a third National Treasure movie, I have an absolutely amazing idea for something Nicolas Cage could steal. Number 5, St. Catherine's head. Coming up first on our list of strange artifacts that the Catholic Church has hidden away is the severed, mummified head of the revered St. Catherine of Siena. You wouldn't really expect there to be a severed head kept out on display, but it is an important head, I've come to understand. When she was young, St. Catherine had a vision of Jesus on a throne surrounded by saints. Afterwards, she devoted her life to Catholicism and she gave herself to the nunnery, cut her hair, scalded herself, and took a vow of celibacy. At 28, Catherine was said to have received the stigmata when 5 red rays shot out of the crucifix she was praying to and pierced her hands, her feet, and her heart. But these were far from the only miracles attributed to the lovely St. Catherine, however. She was said to be seen levitating once during prayer, and even once a priest said he saw a Holy Communion fly from his hand directly into her mouth. Now, I will be honest, that does make her sound a bit like a saintly golden retriever, but okay. Catherine would pass at the young age of 33 and would be canonized a century later. If you don't know, that's a fancy word for being made into a saint post-mortem. While she passed in Rome, there was some disagreement as to where the young saint should be laid to rest eternally. Her hometown of Siena quite wanted her body back. Her spiritual leader, Raymond of Capua, knew he wouldn't really be able to smuggle her entire body past guards in Rome, so he elected to just take her head in a bag, which normally would be terrifying behavior, but it's good here. The story goes that when the guards intercepted Raymond, he prayed to Catherine, and when they looked inside his sack, they found naught but a collection of rose petals and not a severed head. Her final miracle. Now, the head was placed in a reliquary. That's a difficult word to say, especially on a teleprompter. The head was placed in a reliquary where it still remains today, and you can go and pray to it, and I promise it's not gonna blink or anything at you, even though it looks like it just might. And if you're looking for way more stories of creepy relics locked away, haunted object, cursed things, cryptids, conspiracies, aliens, the whole scary 9 yards, Top 5 Scary has all of that and then some. So hit that little bell, hit subscribe, and make sure you do not miss a single thing. Do it after this video, okay? We got way more creepy things locked away coming up for you right now. Number 4, the Grand Grimoire. Our next entry has been formally referred to as the Gospel of Satan, and is said to be a cursed book whose knowledge had to be sealed away to protect humanity. So this might be the most deadly book ever published after Hop on Pop. The Grand Grimoire, who is said to have been penned by a priest in the 16th century, who was possessed by a litany of demons who compelled the man to put their knowledge to paper. Acting as a scribe for these demons, the man wrote everything they knew about dark incantations, spells, instructions on how to cast rituals, ways to bind a demon to you to make it your little minion and do your bidding. Wait, a demon gave instructions on how it wants to be bound to a human to serve humans? Freaky little demon. That's not all too. There is a step-by-step recipe for a little necromancy if you're down to dabble in some dark arts and make some bones dance to your rhythm. The book really covers all the fun stuff you have been told not to do. It's not just brimstone and hellfire neither. There's rituals to help manipulate luck, how to conduct a seance, and I actually think this is adorable. There's even ways to make people love you in there. But dating tip from old Tay, if you need a demon's help to make them like you, it might not be the strongest relationship. so just a heads up. Now, if all of this is sounding super appealing, and I don't blame you, I played a necromancer in Skyrim, I want to make the bones raise, just know that this book is considered high treason. Even so much as cracking the spine is considered equivalent to selling your soul. So, you know, maybe hold off on that Amazon order for a bit. Also, I'm pretty sure the copy they're selling on Amazon is not the original, because due to the book's cursed reputation, the original copy is said to be locked away in the Vatican's secret archives, and I'm sorry, but no matter how many times you ask, they're not going to let you look at it, even if you swear you're just taking a little peek just to look at the illustrations and maybe the dedications. They're going to keep it locked up. I know. Number 3, Hyacinth of Caesarea. Our next entry is the bones of Hyacinth of Caesarea, another Catholic mummy. I'm starting to think there's more Catholic mummies than there were Egyptian ones. Incredibly ornate and gorgeous, the bones of Hyacinth look like something out of one of the Indiana Jones sequels, rather than like a real thing you can go and see, but I promise you they are totally extant. On the grounds of the Fürstenfeld Abbey reside the relics of 2 saints. Now, these aren't just like a toenail or a tongue, and more on that later, but these are full-on science class skeletons dressed to the 9 in gold and jewels, encrusted in more diamonds and rubies than you could imagine. They are probably worth more than your and my apartments combined. Old Hyacinth, Pazzi, as he liked to be called by his friends, was an obscure martyr from the early days of Christianity, slain by the Romans for his faith. We know precious little about him today, but we know that his name appears in a list of martyrs from the 4th century, which suggests that he used to be pretty important, and he was popular enough to write his name down on a list, much like what I'm doing right now. Look at how history repeats itself like that. Isn't that fascinating? Now, Hyacinth's skeleton showed up at the Church of the Assumption in, I'm going to excuse the pronunciation here, Fürstenfeldbruck near Munich at an unknown date. Did somebody just dropped him off? Somebody just dumped a bag of bones on the front step like he's a baby you're giving up for adoption at the fire station? No more questions. The church was sacked by the Swedish army in the 17th century, and when it was rebuilt, they really went all out with the decor, going over the top, a little baroque, including a skeleton decked out in bling, looking like he is about to take over the skeleton rap scene. So that's Hyacinth, largely not remembered in life for any particular reason beyond being slain for his religion, and remembered forever as a ludicrously swagged out skeleton. We can all only hope for similar legacies as dear sweet Hyacinth. Number 2, the tongue of Saint Padilla. Did you know your tongue is made up of 8 muscles? Maybe you didn't. Did you know that one of the most important relics to the Catholic Church is a dried up 8,000-year-old tongue that looks like beef jerky kept inside a golden helmet that looks like something out of a dark fantasy 80s movie? Well, now you do. And have you enjoyed how much of this list is mummified bodies in gold? Because I have. St. Anthony was said to be a jewel case of the Bible, making a name for himself with his apparently extremely inspirational sermons that won the Catholic Church many new members. People would flock in just to hear what St. Anthony was talking about. Apparently, he even got a bunch of ex-Christians to reform and rejoin the faith. He was apparently an incredibly accomplished public speaker, and I would say that he had a silver tongue, but we actually have proof of what color his tongue was because it's kept in a little glass jar. St. Anthony would pass away in 1231 from edema, a horrible disease that causes a buildup and blockage of fluid in the body's tissues. Now, some 30 years later, in 1263, he was exhumed, and shocking the gravediggers who were doing it, while his body had rotted and decomposed, his legendary tongue was still intact, as incorruptible as it had been in life, allegedly still wet with saliva. I wonder if he could still taste. Seeing it was a miracle, the gravediggers took his tongue alongside the bottom half of his jaw, and they are both displayed in the Basilica of St. Anthony of Padua in elaborate gold reliquaries. But honestly, it looks like something straight out of Warhammer 40k. Does no one think this is as odd as I do? Maybe I'm an outsider. I didn't grow up terribly Catholic, so I don't really know these imagery. I know the story behind it isn't terribly scary, but the image of this tongue and jaw inside a little glass helmet wrapped in gold looks like something I would ask an AI to make if I typed in nightmare. A tongue shouldn't look like that. And I feel like a jaw shouldn't look like that either. Am I alone in this? Am I weird for thinking this is weird? You let me know down below in the comments if maybe I just lack context on all of this. And number 1, Camillus de Lellis' heart. Camillus de Lellis was a man with a big heart full of love, never ending in generosity. We know just how big his heart is because it is kept in a glass jar and it is salted to preserve its legacy. Whoa. Camillus started out pretty humble, born in 16th century Naples. He would later become a soldier until a brutal gambling problem would end up overtaking his life, leaving him in rags driving a donkey cart, but he knew that a far better life was out there. Eventually, he was urged by a friar to explore the lighter side of his soul, and eventually someone was able to pierce his heart both figuratively and later literally, and persuaded him into seeking divine retribution. Camillus would devote his life to providing for the ailing, but tragically, and perhaps unsurprisingly if you spent all your time around sick people before modern medicine, a lifetime of caring for the sick led to him also becoming gravely ill, soaking up a litany of ailments, including a sore in his leg for 46 years, a rupture for 38 years, 2 callous sores in the sole of a foot, violent nephritic colics, intense kidney pain, and for a long time a loss of appetite. Now all of these things, working in tandem, would eventually claim Camillus, a man who gave his life to healing the sick. So post-mortem he was canonized and thought of as the patron saint of the sick. And what better way, I ask, to venerate a man famous for his ever-giving heart than to cut his heart out like he was in the Temple of Doom and start salting his heart like it was beef jerky. You can go to St. Mary Magdalene's Church in Rome to go see if his heart, put a stethoscope up to it, check if it's still beating, but it's pretty dried up and tucked away behind glass where you can go and pay your respects and see if it has any life left to bestow and maybe if it'll help you out with an illness at all. Number 5. Benito Mussolini. The Vatican isn't just the seat of the Catholic Church. Did you know that actually the Vatican is the smallest country in the world? Despite the fact that it does exist inside Rome, inside Italy, the Vatican technically is not part of Italy, but rather its own sovereign little country. About 1,000 people live there total. But it hasn't always been this way, and the reason that it became that way is a little darker than I'm sure the church would like to admit. It was a treaty with fascist leader Benito Mussolini. In 1922, Mussolini and the National Fascist Party came to power in Italy, crushing democracy and putting up a pretty hostile dictatorship in its place. In 1929, Mussolini and the church came together to have a little meet and greet and sign a treaty, granting the church status as a private enclave, a sovereign state inside of Italy. Mussolini wouldn't bother the Vatican, and they wouldn't bother him. Mussolini even paid out a massive settlement, which the church invested and is believed to be valued at around $780 million. Alongside tax exemption and priests getting a nice salary from the Italian government. All of those benefits you can thank a fascist government for. Perhaps most illuminating, however, was a clause that protected the Vatican's dignity, meaning as part of their laws as a sovereign state, they were allowed to arrest and try anyone who criticized the people and the church. In exchange for signing this treaty, the Catholic Church publicly supported the fascist dictatorship and was recognized as Italy's official government. The Vatican's own newspaper printed shortly after the deal went down, "Italy has been given back to God and God to Italy." And they only have the support of someone who was involved in hundreds of thousands of deaths to thank. And if you're looking for way more strange, true things out of history, conspiracies about the Catholic Church, cryptids, aliens, and all sorts of freaky business, Top 5 Scary has all of that and then some. So click on through, hit subscribe, please make sure to hit that bell so you get everything and do not miss a single scream. But you do that at the end of this video, okay? We got way more Catholic Church secrets coming up. Number 4, the treacherous Pope Boniface. Let he who is without sin cast the first stone. This idea being that none of us are truly free of sin, and we're all born into this world natural sinners. Well, some people really take that idea and really run with it. And you would be surprised how high up the Catholic Church some of these troublemakers get. That's where Pope Boniface VII comes in, one of history's most notorious popes for his incredibly unholy behavior. Pope Boniface was actually so wildly controversial that Dante Alighieri wrote in the Inferno that Pope Boniface was condemned to the 8th circle of hell where the frauds were kept. It's a really good window into the sort of general mindset of the population that in their books they were imagining all the ways he'd be tormented in hell. And as a quick aside, for the comment section, Dante's Inferno, is that history's first fan fiction? There's a very serious argument to be made that it is. Anyway, Boniface saw the destruction of Palestrina, a city that had already peacefully surrendered and submitted, but that wasn't good enough for the church. Palestrina had already been burned to the ground, and goofy old Pope Boniface ordered that they plow it down to the dirt and soil to ensure that absolutely nothing of the city remained standing, a real salt of the earth approach. He was definitely a guy who loved his neighbors.
He really loved his neighbors, in the sense that the vow of celibacy that men of the cloth have to swear to, Boniface didn't really, believe in at all. He was alleged to engage in all kinds of parties with all manner of bedroom companions, having once stated that he felt intercourse with younger people was as natural as hands rubbing together. A really, really great guy all together, and he also loved building statues of himself all the time, so he was very prideful, which that's the worst sin of them all, really. Number 3, Galileo. Science and religion do have a place alongside one another in the world, I think. Now, science and religion have had a complicated history, they've never quite seen eye to eye, kind of always furrowing their brows and glaring at each other through the hallways, but one could never truly disprove wholly the existence of God through science, and I think science can illuminate and shine new light on ways to glorify religion, right? Maybe? Well, not particularly. As one could imagine, there's a great deal of difficulty the church has with science. In 1633, Galileo Galilei, the renowned astronomer, made himself an enemy of the Catholic Church and God for having the unbelievable, blasphemous, heretical viewpoint that the Earth orbits the Sun and not the other way around. Now, Galileo didn't quite have it all the way, since he did posit that the Sun is the center of the universe, and he wasn't super right about that, but hey, give the guy a little credit. He was doing all this before the TI-84, okay? He was just looking up in the sky making all these guesses. Pretty smart guy. Was doing better than most astronomers out there. Now, for this most heinous, disgusting, unbelievably sinful crime, Galileo was arrested and put on trial, where 10 cardinals sat before him passing judgment and trying to decide how best to punish this disgusting heretic, floating some fun ideas like imprisonment for life, torment, being burned at the stake. Again, this is all because Galileo suggested how the planets work, and he was mostly right about this, which is important to hammer home. Eventually, Galileo renounced his beliefs, saying he was wrong and he was getting up there in age and didn't want to spend the rest of his life suffering. So in an act of true humble forgiveness, the church instead decreed that instead of being burned or anything, Galileo be condemned to spend the rest of his days in his home, which he did until his passing. That'll teach him. Now eventually, obviously, the church kind of had to walk back some of that treatment of Galileo. In 1992, they spoke out saying that maybe he was kind of technically right about a few things here and there, and mumbled out an apology like a schoolyard bully being forced to say sorry by the teachers. Sure, it was about 350 years too late, but I bet Galileo probably really appreciated it and would have loved to have known how vindicated by history he would have been. Number 2, the wild and wacky life of Pope Benedict IX. Over the years, there have been many controversial popes. I mean, there's a bunch on this list already. In fact, you'd probably find more popes are wrapped in controversy than you might imagine. Now, it's pointless to compare sins on any sort of moral scale as to who's the most evil or the worst pope, but it's hard to argue that few of them got up to as much chaos and trouble as Pope Benedict IX, who was one of the wackiest, most notorious popes out there. He once sold the position because he got bored of it. It's said he began his pontification when he was a young man because his wealthy family just wanted it, and that was like a thing you could do back then. If you had enough money, you could just bribe the church and ask that your son become pope. Benedict loved the lifestyle and behaved the way Joffrey Baratheon would, kind of really letting the power get to his head almost immediately. He would spend his money on women of the night, hosting lecherous, wild, erotic parties, which allegedly would have all manner of man, woman, and if the stories are to be believed, animals as well. It was not long before there were conspiracies being drawn up to assassinate the Pope, if you can believe that. Even just saying that feels weird, but they wanted to assassinate the Pope. Probably in a case of divine intervention or fate, on a feast day, his enemies snuck into St. Peter's Basilica carrying rope, ready to tangle up the Pope. But a solar eclipse scared the assassins so badly they called the whole thing off, and to be honest, I totally get it. If I was planning on disposing the Pope and the sun got blocked out, I'd assume God was furious at me. Failed coups notwithstanding, Pope Benedict's reputation did not improve much. He was attacked by an angry mob in 1045, and he was forced to flee and would be replaced by another pope, one Sylvester III. 2 months later, however, Benedict would return to take the title back. But 2 months later, he decided that he didn't really enjoy being pope anymore. It wasn't as fun, what with all the constant bombardment of hate and failed attempts on his life. So he sold it to his godfather for what amounted to nearly $30 million. Imagine buying the Pope. Imagine buying being the voice of God. Anyway, if you can believe it, like Emperor Palpatine, somehow Pope Benedict returned a third time. King Henry III of Germany had arrested Pope Sylvester III for being a false pope, and the godfather that he had sold the throne to had given up the papacy, admitting that it was shameful and heretical for him to have ever done so in the first place. So Henry appointed a new German pope while Benedict was in hiding, and that pope mysteriously passed away 8 months later from a poisoning, which many historians suspect Benedict had his little fingers in. So Benedict came back for a third time to be the pope, only this time no one was putting up with him. They'd been through this 2 more times, they weren't doing it again. Henry III sent troops to drag him out of the basilica. He spent his dying years in a monastery and is now remembered in history as one of the worst popes ever. And number 1, the Pazzi Conspiracy. If you've garnered anything from this video that I've been telling you, I sincerely hope it's that the Pope doesn't always follow the rules. Sure, the guy interprets the will of God, he's got a direct line to talking to him, but that doesn't mean he follows every single one of his rules. Now, we've already discussed some of the wildest sins that popes have been caught up in, but let's top it all off with a full-blown assassination conspiracy revolving around the Pope ordering a hitman. No, really. In the 1470s, Pope Sixtus IV hatched a scheme to rid Florence of the Medicis, the most influential family in the country at the time, rivaling the church. The Medicis had served as the bankers for the papacy for generations, and as such were loaded. Pope Sixtus kickstarted this conflict when he changed the Medicis over as the bankers to the Pazzi family, who were more loyal to him. The Medicis didn't want to pay to help the Pope claim the town of Imola, which the Medicis themselves wanted to lord over. So with these in the way, the Pope thought that something had to be done about these meddling Medicis. So Sixtus contracted 2 assassins to carry out the plot against Lorenzo and Giuliano de' Medici during Easter Mass on Sunday, which just feels unbelievably disrespectful if you're the Pope, You can't talk in church, but you can orchestrate a political assassination. That's fine to do on Sunday, on Easter Sunday? Now, if you're sitting here listening to this and you're kind of scratching your head because you feel like all of this sounds a bit familiar, imagine you have a white hood on and you're jumping into a bale of hay, because this was a driving plotline in Assassin's Creed 2, where protagonist Ezio ends up helping out Lorenzo Medici a great deal. Yeah, no, the games were really inspired by true history, save for a few extendo blades and boss fights against the Pope, but a lot of that stuff really did happen. History is just as weird as the video games make it out to be. Now, if you remember from Assassin's Creed 2, Giuliano was fatally slain, but Lorenzo survived and rallied support of Florence in a war against the church. Lorenzo picked off conspirators and then sailed to Naples to meet King Ferdinand to discuss a peaceful solution to the bubbling war. There's a reason they called him Il Magnifico. This guy was great at strategy. In the end, the plot failed drastically because all it really did was cement people's support to Lorenzo Medici. People loved the fact that he survived an assassination. They made a medal commemorating this for him, and it brought shame to Pope Sixtus, and it inspired one of the best games Ubisoft ever put out.
Number 5 on this list is the Templo Mayor ruins. So a church is typically defined as a place for Christian worship, but let's loosen up that definition just a little bit and start thinking about it as a building or landmark where people would have worshipped higher beings. If we start thinking about it like that, then the Templo Mayor ruins can certainly qualify. Mexico has a lot of haunted spots, but this is at the top of their list for sure. Gaurav Gupta writes, this archaeological site in Mexico has a blood-soaked past. It is a haunted Aztec civilization site that has made its presence felt throughout the time. Around 4,000 people were brutally killed to please Aztec gods. The priests would cut out the beating hearts from the victims' chests and then throw their lifeless bodies on the stairs of the Aztec temple. Aztec's last emperor, Cuauhtémoc, made his last stand invading Spanish armies before he was tortured and killed. This Aztec is now a museum, and tourists report strange sensational feelings and sightings of shadow figures. 4,000 people were likely sacrificed here. That is a truly absurd amount of sacrifices. Then throw on the fact that a great battle took place here, and you end up with so much death. Needless to say, the spirits of those that passed have never really left. Glowing orbs are always spotted at this place, especially in the evening. There have been reports of these glowing orbs touching the people and transporting them to the world of the dead. They go into a hypnotic state and can't move, sort of like what happens to people in the latest season of Stranger Things, if any of you have watched that. They have a very hard time explaining what has happened to them after the fact, but they know that it was the dead. This is accompanied by a giant beam of light that flashes into the sky. Their There is evil here, there just has to be. All of the death that has transpired over the years has left a horrible stain on this place, and evil has congregated here. No one knows what type of evil or what spirit is behind this, but just know that this is a scary place that you should probably avoid. Number 4 on this list is the Ness Church. Ness Church is a Norwegian church that is no longer operating. It's a collection of ruins now and a very popular spot for ghost hunters. The ghost hunters have discovered that electronic equipment, or your standard cell phone, isn't going to do so hot in this church. For whatever reason, the second that you bring anything like that in, it just completely shuts down. If one wants to have an electronic device here, then it needs to be specifically made to withstand strong spiritual energy. The most popular myth surrounding the ghostly presence that resides here is a priest named Jacob Christian Finnegan. This was a priest who presided over this church from 1800 to 1837. Apparently, he suffered a very grim fate here along with his children. It's thought that he and his children were killed by an evil gang who came through the church looting it. They killed the priest and then, ever so cruelly, bricked his children up and left them to die. This is only one variation of the tale though, because one legend actually says that the priest did this to his kids himself. Regardless of which one is historically accurate, they're both pretty bad. The screams of these children are frequently accompanied by the sighting of this priest. It's said that he will stalk those who come here and follow them around, giving them a horribly uneasy feeling. It's very likely that if you go by yourself, this ghostly priest will attack you and could do some serious damage. Maybe he wasn't evil when he was alive, but he certainly is now. Number 3 on this list is Greyfriars Kirk and Churchyard. As the name Greyfriars might hint, this church is located in Scotland. History Hit says, with the kirk tracing its origin to 1598 and the graveyard dating back even further to the 1560s, Greyfriars Kirk and Kirkyard in Edinburgh is said to be one of the most haunted religious sites in the world. Known for body snatching and violent ghosts, the famously fearsome site has even been referred to by Scottish poet Robert Louis Stevenson. The site's most famous ghost is the Mackenzie poltergeist. George Mackenzie, who was known during his lifetime as a ruthless persecutor of Scottish Covenanters, a Presbyterian movement in the 17th century. His spirit was reportedly released in 1999 when a homeless man looking for somewhere to sleep broke into his final resting place, the Black Mausoleum. Next to this mausoleum is the former Covenanters prison, which housed some 1,200 members of a failed anti-government revolution in 1679. Only 257 prisoners came out alive, with the remaining dead said to haunt the churchyard. The negative energy that surrounds this church is said to be so strong that it's attracted some pretty powerful beings. The devil is the one being that people associate with this place. Some believe that this church is actually a secret lair for the devil, that these other demonic spirits are working to keep us away from this place so the devil can fulfill his evil agenda. If this is the case, then I think that we should do as the devil wants and leave it alone. Number 2 on this list is Borley Rectory. Built in 1863 in England, this is one of the most famous haunted churches in the world. We can thank the personalities of Ed and Lorraine Warren for bringing it into the spotlight, as they had quite the experience at this church back in the day. The horror stories began back in 1929. A journalist named V.C. Wall was a photographer in the woods nearby the rectory taking pictures one evening when they saw something very strange. From the outside, the rectory looked like it had a light on, but if you walked inside, it was all dark. Wall also saw the ghost of a nun that evening walking around the graveyard looking as eerie as you may expect. After they told people about this story, some ghost hunters came forward and provided an explanation. Back in the 1300s, there was a monastery here. At this monastery, a monk had a relationship with a nun. This was found out and resulted in deadly punishment for both people. The nun got it particularly bad though, because she was bricked up alive in the convent walls and left there to die. The 1929 story was the big one that kicked everything off, but after this happened, other stories started emerging. Stories about this land before the rectory was even built. Apparently this area of land was always haunted and dealing with ghostly presences. Strange rapping sounds, bells ringing, objects moving and flying around without anyone touching them are all very common sights at the Borley Rectory. The ghost of this nun is also a regular character here, making herself known known to newcomers quite often. You may even see the ghost coach. A headless phantom coach driver is said to be around the area and will approach people every now and again and take them away. Why anyone would ever get into a coach driven by a headless ghost is beyond me, but apparently it happens. Everything about this rectory and land is evil, and it needs to be avoided. And finally, number 1 on this list is Nidaros Cathedral. This is not only Norway's most important cathedral, but also one of the most haunted as well. I mean, in all honesty, it literally looks like Dracula's castle if Dracula's castle was a cathedral. It was constructed in the 1300s, but the actual hauntings didn't begin until relatively recently in its lifetime. In 1924, Bishop Mary Gleditch saw something pretty scary and gruesome. The ghost of a monk who had a massive slash directly across his neck. Ever since that day, this monk is seen very regularly. Nobody knows why though. People and historians have looked through the history of this cathedral and can't seem to find any record of a big monk population ever staying here. However, it doesn't make sense that this random monk ghost would just show up out of nowhere, so you have to imagine that he was here at some point before. You also have to imagine that he got that cut on his neck here too. All of it is very dark and mysterious and makes you wonder what else happened here that wasn't documented. Number 5 on this list is Lord Combermere, or maybe better put as the ghost of Lord Combermere. The picture that we're going to look at today depicts the ghostly silhouette of the late Lord Combermere sitting in his chair. Insider writes, amateur photographer Corbet allegedly set up her camera and took this hour-long exposure while the funeral of her brother-in-law, Lord Combermere, was taking place 4 miles from the home. Interestingly, the apparition that appears to be sitting in the deceased Lord Combermere's chair is suggested to be Lord Combermere himself. I think the scariest part about this photograph is the timing. The fact that this was apparently captured literally right when the funeral for this man was being held. It's very possible that his spirit could have still been in and around the area and wasn't quite ready to leave the world of the living yet. Ghost Story UK says it's thought by some that during that time a servant might have come into the room and sat briefly in the chair, creating the transparent image. This idea was refuted by members of the household, all testifying that they were all attending Lord Combermere's funeral. Sir William Barrett, who investigated the case and reported on it in the Journal of the Society for Physical Research, was not satisfied. Working on the theory that a manservant may have come in and seated himself in the chair, he took a test photograph and got a picture that was almost a duplicate of the Combermere photograph. The matter seemed ended, but as he told in his book On the Threshold of the Unseen in 1918, sometime later he received a letter from Lord Combermere's daughter-in-law about the photograph. She said that the face was always too indistinct to be quite convincing to me, though some of his children had no doubt at all of the identity. I may add, none of the manservants in the house closely resembled the figure and were all young men who were all attending the funeral. No one resembled him and everyone was out of the house when this photo was taken. For years the church and others have tried to explain this photograph, but they just simply can't. Maybe it was the ghost of Lord Combermere, or maybe it was a demon playing a trick on all of us. We may never know. Number 4 on this list is Freddie Jackson. In this photo, we're going to be looking at Sir Victor Goddard's Royal Air Force Squadron. This picture was taken in 1919 after World War I and showed a bunch of young strapping pilots. What's wild about this though is the unexpected visitor that we have in the back row. If we zoom into the top row and look at the man 4th from the left, we can see something over his right shoulder. An apparition of sorts that resembles a human face. After people started taking note of this and examined it, those who had worked with the squadron identified that face as Freddie Jackson. Freddie Jackson was a mechanic with this squadron for a while, but the crazy part is that he had died in a propeller accident several days earlier. Similarly to Lord Combermere, the day that this picture was taken was the day of his funeral. Maybe his ghost showed up because he was pissed all his friends were taking pictures and not paying their respects. But seriously though, how on earth do you explain a photo like that with tons of other people in it? It's impossible for it to have been staged, and it's clear that there's something there. Hopefully Freddie was able to find peace after his impromptu photo bomb. Number 3 on this list is the couple's demon. William Hope was a paranormal investigator who lived from 1863 to 1933. During that time, he was responsible for capturing a wide array of spiritual photographs which showcase ghosts and demons. Now, after evaluating some of his work, I think it's fair to assume that some of it is doctored. I'm not sure how one man would have been able to capture capture all the demonic pictures that he did without potentially faking a few. That being said though, I don't think that everything he's done has been doctored, and I imagine that there are some with serious legitimacy to them. One of his most famous is of an older couple with what clearly looks to be a demon standing behind them. When they took this photo, nobody was physically there, and they could only capture this devilish creature when they looked at the film after the fact. Some other entries on this list, I mean, you might be able to classify as a ghost, but this is 100% a demon. The eyes are black and unforgiving, and it looks as if you're getting sucked into a black hole of nothingness. You can't make out this creature's lower body at all, and she's just all black. She reminds me a lot of a few urban legends of female demons appearing around the world. Their stories differ, but there are some commonalities between them all. Usually a woman appears like this to a stranger, asks them a few questions, and if they don't answer properly, will drag them to hell. I'm actually surprised that the people in this photograph managed to get out of it safely without feeling her presence or being attacked while they were there. I'm pretty sure that the church can explain this one, they just probably won't like the explanation very much. Number 2 on this list is the lady in the lift. Whenever you step into an elevator, it feels as if you've stepped into a portal of some kind. If you really think about it, it kind of is a portal considering you start on one floor and then finish on a different one. Now obviously there isn't anything magical about said elevators, and this portal of sorts is really just a mechanical innovation that takes you up and down tall buildings. That being said, this non-paranormal portal definition might not apply to the elevator in this photo. As we can see, there are a few people hanging out and chatting by the elevators. This was a picture captured by a doctor in a hospital in Bolivia. The elevator in the right of the image decided to open all by itself though. The group didn't think anything of it at the time, but when they looked back, noticed something fairly unsettling. The apparition of a woman is clearly standing in the elevator, staring right at them. No one knows who this woman is, but it's clear that she's either a ghost or a demon. Elevators have always seemed to have a connection to ghostly apparitions for whatever reason. Maybe it's because they do give off the sensation of being a portal, but there are a lot of stories connected to elevators and hauntings. This photo actually reminds me a lot of a haunted place in Austria. A young girl was at a university residence during Christmas. She was pretty much the only one who stayed there and didn't go home for the holidays. While she was there by herself, she accidentally stepped into the elevator shaft and fell to her death. Now she's set to haunt that elevator and torment those who step inside. Maybe this photo is of a similar story, but just at the hospital. It's impossible to say for sure, but either way guys, I'd be taking the stairs. And finally, number 1 on this list is the little boy. This photo is extremely scary and just flat out disturbing. BuzzFeed writes, the Reddit user who posted this image was deeply skeptical that there was anything paranormal going on, although they couldn't deny there is something chilling about the figure of a little boy staring out from the ruins of an old school. I grew up in a small rural town in between mountains. A couple years ago they were tearing down an old elementary school. A guy my mom knew went in and took pics with his cell phone. When he uploaded them, this was one of the pics. I don't believe in stuff like this at all, I just really don't know how to explain it since it was a cell phone pic, and I'm pretty sure that no one in my podunk hometown knows how to make fake pics. So maybe he doesn't know how, but I know how to explain it. You're in the ruins of an old school, and those ruins are haunted by the demon of a young boy. Sometimes the simplest answers are the right ones, and this to me looks like an example of that. This little dude 100% looks possessed, and you can't even really make out his legs. Nor can you actually see his arms either for that matter. Kind of difficult to make up a logical explanation for a kid with no arms and no legs floating in the middle of an abandoned school. Also, side note, but can you imagine being the one to take this picture? Like you turn a corner and you see that dude and your first thought is, I'm gonna pull out my phone and take a picture of this kid. Like if that's me, I am straight up running out of that thing and we're burning that building hot. Number 5 on this list is the farm demon. Most of the time we look at these photos and they're typically pretty old, captured 100 years ago and often chalked up as being a double exposure error or something like that. I don't think that can be said for the farm demon though. Stephen Wagner writes, this amazing photo was taken by photographer and graphic designer Neil Sandbach in 2008. Neil was photographing some scenic shots at a farm in England as part of a project for wedding stationery. The couple planned to have their wedding ceremony held there later. Neil was astonished when he examined the digital photo on his computer. There, as if peeking around a corner at him, is a ghostly white, almost glowing figure of what looks like a child. Neil says he's quite sure that there was no one there at the time. There's further corroboration that this is a true ghost photo. Neil had shown the couple the anomalous photo, and before the wedding they asked the staff at the farm if they'd ever seen any spooky experiences there before. They didn't mention Neil's photo. Indeed, they admitted that the figure of a young boy dressed in white night clothes had been seen on several occasions around the barn. So it looks as if this barn is haunted by some type of demon child, and Neil just happened to get lucky enough and capture it on camera. I think what's really scary about this though is that they had no idea it was there while they were staying at the farm, meaning that this demon child would have been stalking Neil the whole time. And what's even crazier than that is that this couple literally continued with the wedding. Like, scenery and all that quaint stuff is important, but a demon child running around the grounds? That's definitely a no-go wedding spot for me. Number 4 on this list is the demon pilot. In 1987, Mrs. Sayer and some of her closest friends were visiting Fleet Air Arms Station at Yeovilton, Somerset in England. As is customary with places that have a bunch of airplanes, you gotta take a photo of you inside of one as if you're flying it. Mrs. Sayer hopped into a helicopter that had been out of commission for a while, and she got her friends to take a snap of her while she was in it. The picture that came out was not what Mrs. Sayer or any of her pals expected though. When they took a look at the photo a while later, they saw what is a very clear image of a pilot sitting next to her. Actually, claiming that it's a pilot is a bit of a stretch. In truth, it's just a figure with a white shirt on that looks like a man. What this thing's connection to Mrs. Sayer or to the helicopter is anyone's guess. Apparently, when that photo was being taken, even though Mrs. Sayer had a bright smile on her face, she wasn't feeling so hot. In fact, she was feeling rather scared and anxious. She had no idea why at the time, and it was a passing feeling that went away after a few minutes, but just an overwhelming feeling of anxiety while she was there. To this day, nobody knows what this apparition is, what it's doing there, or what could have caused it to appear. Number 3 on this list is the Pink Lady. In Greencastle, Indiana, there's a massive mansion called the O'Hara Mansion. The pictures in question are by a man named Guy Winters who was investigating said mansion several years ago. This mansion is abandoned and has been for some time, and the locals like to keep it that way. Apparently, they have believed for quite some time that some sort of demonic entity lives there and watches over the grounds. It's thought that trespassing on them could endanger your life. This didn't deter Guy Winters and his friend Terry, who wanted to find out for themselves if there really was some sort of evil presence here. They went into the mansion and stayed there for several days and nights with cameras documenting everything. What they found was the Pink Lady, a vaporous pink demon that Guy Winters was able to snap on photograph. Apparently, as is with most of this demon photography, Guy didn't actually see the apparition in real life, but it was only noticed after the picture was developed. This apparition definitely looks like something evil if you ask me. It almost looks like a demon witch, if that's even a thing, but certainly something that has the intention of possessing you or consuming your soul. This picture went along with a bunch of weird occurrences at this place too. Apparently the two boys were perpetually on edge and kept having strange things happen to them. Things would move without them touching them, the temperature in the rooms would change drastically. They both talked about having a voice in their head that they weren't familiar with, something that had them starting to become convinced that they were losing their minds. They might not have known it at the time, but it seems like all of these things can be chalked up to the work of the Pink Lady. Number 2 on this list is the White Lady of Worstead Church. Similarly to our Pink Lady that we mentioned earlier, we have another vaporous demon ghost thing resembling that of a woman. In 1975, Diane and Peter Berthelot visited the Worstead Church in North Norfolk. Peter snapped a pic of his wife praying on one of the church benches. They didn't think anything about the photo at the time, just a cute day at the church, but months later when they went to go get the film developed, one of their friends saw the photo and asked, "Who's that sitting behind you?" Behind Mrs. Berthelot is what looked to be the apparition of a woman wearing old clothes that were pretty much all white. This was obviously really spooky to the couple since they didn't remember anyone like that sitting behind her when they took the picture. They went back to Worstead Church the next summer and showed it to the Reverend. Apparently, this church for years now has been riddled by the spirit of the White Lady. It's said that this ghost demon is a healer who appears when someone near is in need of healing. When she visited the church at the time of the photo, Diane was in ill health and was taking antibiotics. Now, even though this ghost being is a healer, it can also curse you too. According to one story, on Christmas Eve in 1830, a man boasted a challenge to the White Lady. He said he would climb to the top of the church's belfry and kiss her if she would appear. So, up he went. Hours went by and his friends got worried though. They went up to go search for him and they found him in the belfry, cowering in a corner, terrified. "I've seen her," he told them. "I've seen her." And then he died. The demon or ghost or whatever it is clearly capable of totally stunning you out of sheer fright. I personally can't imagine the feeling of literally dying out of fear, but that's what happened here, and it proves that this ghost, if that is what it is, has demonic qualities to it. Now this church has been turned into a pub, believe it or not, but this presence still lingers. I'm all for getting a brew with the lads, but not at the expense of getting totally shell-shocked like that. Number 1 on this list is the Coventry Demon. Stephen Wagner writes, "On January 22nd, 1985, the Coventry Freeman organization were having a dinner event at St. Mary's Guildhall in Coventry, UK. Everyone in the group had her or his head bowed in prayer when this photo was taken, including a towering mysterious figure standing top left. The strange cowled spectre appears to be wearing clothes much like a monk frock from another time. Lord Mayor Walter Brandish, who was present at the dinner, said that there was no one at the event who was dressed like that, and he could not explain the presence of the interloper in the photo. St. Mary's Guildhall dates back to the 14th century and served as a prison for Mary, Queen of Scots." So as you guys can see, this creature doesn't look like anything human. I know that it resembles something like a monk, as Wagner was saying, but I also think that there's an argument that could be made that it resembles something from the underworld as well. The robes that it's wearing, coupled with the shape of its body, also coupled with the fact that no one actually saw this thing in person at all, kind of leads me to think that there must be something demonic about it. Also, the face doesn't look human at all. It's all black and those eyes don't look like human eyes. I have no idea why a demonic monk-looking creature would show up at this dinner event, but I also don't have any other explanation for why this thing popped up in the photo to begin with. Toss a comment down below if you have any theories on what this thing is or what it could be doing there in the first place. Number 5 on this list is Hallstatt Carner. Hallstatt Carner is one weird church, man, let me tell you. I'm all about unique and cool decorations, but human body parts? Kind of where I draw the line, guys. Discovery.com says, "Many bone churches and ossuaries are decorated with femurs and pelvises, but at Hallstatt Carner, the skulls themselves are decorated. More than 600 of the skulls on display in this Beenhaus, also known as Bone House in English, bear their former owners' names, professions, and the date of their death. Many are also adorned with decorative garlands and flowers. But perhaps what makes this bone church stand out the most is the fact that the most recent remains to be interred here belong to a woman who passed away in 1983 after having requested the Beenhaus as her final resting place. What's more, she might not be the last because the church is still open to receiving similar requests." So yeah, the dark secret here is that there is literal bones still being added. 1983 is really not that long ago when you think about it, and like the article suggests, that's probably not the last person to have been thrown into this array of skeletons. I guess it isn't, but it feels like this should be illegal or something. At the very least, it's just super weird. Like, why is a bunch of dead bodies and bones and stuff bringing anyone closer to God? Isn't the whole point of church to connect with your spiritual side? Not get grossed out by a bunch of dead people who you might have even known at one point. The church is located in Austria and has got to be one of the scariest churches in that country for sure. Unless you want your bones to be added to some religious display, I would stay away from this place. Number 4 on this list is the St. Louis Cathedral, a beautiful church like many on this list, which is riddled with spirits. List first says, like the city it serves, the St. Louis Cathedral in New Orleans is a font of strange myths and legends. Originally built by the city's French rulers, the modern cathedral wasn't completed until the 1850s. According to lore, the ghosts of the old structure came along for the ride. One of the cathedral's better known ghosts, Père Dagobert, was an 18th century priest. Dagobert was renowned for his kindness, especially his willingness to treat the poor and terminally ill. During the 1760s, several members of his congregation decided to revolt against the city's new Spanish rulers. The mainly French and Creole rebels successfully pushed the initial Spanish force out of the city, but a larger force later managed to claim New Orleans for the Spanish king. Infuriated by the earlier rebellion, Irish-Spanish governor Alejandro O'Reilly decided to not only execute the rebels, but also leave their rotting bodies on the doorstep of the St. Louis Cathedral. As a devout Catholic, Dagobert could not stand by while Catholic bodies were so roughly treated. After failing to get O'Reilly's permission to properly bury the bodies, Dagobert led a funeral procession down to St. Peter's Cemetery and placed the slain men in unmarked graves. Dagobert's successor, a Spanish priest named Pierre Antoine, is also said to haunt the cathedral. More intriguingly, Antoine's friend, voodoo priestess Mary Laveau, who often prayed at the church during her lifetime, is also considered to be one of the many spirits inside the cathedral. So we got voodoo priestesses, unmarked haunted graves, multiple spirits of bodies that were buried improperly. This church is just one big mess. Many people think that there are also a bunch of other secrets that this place has that we don't know about. Like this was a spot for a secret society hundreds of years ago who performed some very questionable rituals, and that's why this place is as haunted as it is. Whatever really happened here, we know it was dark and we know that it left its mark. Number 3 on this list is Egg Hill Church. This church was home to one of the worst tragedies a church has ever been host to. I've never been a real churchgoer myself, but from my understanding, love, life, spirituality, all of this is supposed to be in the air when you go, and the whole reason for doing so. Death and hate and violence, that's all supposed to be left at the door. Pennsylvania's Egg Hill Church didn't quite do that. Instead, they invited death into the church on one particular Halloween night. Many years ago, the whole community gathered into the church on Halloween. The priest passed around bread and wine as is customary, but this bread and wine was a little off. In fact, it was very off. So off that everyone who had it died. It was poisoned. It's unknown whether the town had collectively decided to end their lives together that night or if this was all the priests doing, but either way, tens to hundreds of people's bodies lay lifeless on the ground when it was all said and done. Now, what are we left with? Well, the ghosts of all of these people, obviously. Even worse than that, the spirit of this evil priest still lingers here too, and apparently, he isn't done with the living. He's said to be very dangerous and wants to drag visitors down with him and take their life. This whole story is pretty much as dark as you can get, and it's no wonder the place is totally messed up today. Number 2 on this list is St. Nicholas Church. Hey, it's me. It just so happens that my church is haunted by a dozen spirits. Great. List first says St. Nicholas Church is practically haunted by default. That's because the village of Pluckley, its home, is reputably the most haunted locale in all of England. The Kent village is home to the Watercress woman, who occupies the Pinnock Bridge, and to the ghost of a schoolmaster who committed in front of his pupils. According to a conservative estimate, Pluckley contains no fewer than 12 active spirits. The church itself is said to be the home of both the beautiful ghost of Lady Daring and the Lady in Red, a ghost who searches the adjacent churchyard for her lost baby. The ghost of a former miller who worked in the area is also said to haunt the churchyard in search of a long-lost love. Also, the ghost of a monk at nearby Greystone's house is also said to be seen during the night. Finally, visitors to St. Nicholas have reported seeing lights in the church's windows when no one was inside. So we have another church with just a plethora of horrible things. Someone taking their own life, a missing a man who has lost his loved one. My question is, why did all of this happen at this one church? Like, what really caused all of this to transpire in the first place? Are we just supposed to believe that it's all coincidence, or is there actually something more afoot here? I think that's the real secret, and sadly, I don't know if we're ever going to be able to find the true answer. And finally, number 1 on this list is St. Andres on the Red. Just that name alone, on the Red. Like, of course this place had to have some dark secrets. List first says St. Andrews on the Red, completed in 1849, is located in the town of Selkirk, which is more or less a suburb of Winnipeg. It's the oldest stone church in Western Canada, and it may be the region's most haunted thanks to the spirits of former plague victims. Other apparitions are said to populate the church's graveyard. Eyewitnesses have reported seeing a ghostly man clad in black and a mysterious woman in white. Also, a disembodied pair of red eyes have startled the visitors in the past, while a ghost car has been noted not far from the church's main entrance. If you're thinking about visiting the church or graveyard, be wary. Those who've claimed to have seen the various apparitions also reported having terrible nightmares the following nights. Most of these nightmares apparently involved the gates of the cemetery, which rattle even though no hands are seen shaking them. Some people can't shake these nightmares either. The occasional individual will have these persist for months or even years. I'm sure that the architecture and natural beauty is nice and all, but I'm not trying to risk nightmares for a year to see it. I do wonder what happened to those gates though. Is it some weird thing with the wind that's causing it, or is it what people suggest, some type of ghostly intervention? I tend to think some sort of spirit has to be involved, considering the thing with the nightmares happens as well, but you gotta wonder who. Sometimes I really do think that being a paranormal investigator would be awesome, because you could get to the bottom of these things, but then again, that's a pretty unforgiving profession. Number 5 on this list is Pelagius. Pelagius lived around 390 AD, and although very little is known about his personal life, we do know that the church was really not happy with his theological teachings. The Catholic gentleman says, Pelagianism radically corrupted the church's teachings on grace, sin, and the fall. Its namesake, the British monk Pelagius, taught that the sin of Adam had no bearing on subsequent generations. Essentially, man was inherently good and unaffected by the fall. In practice, this meant that a man could come to God by his own free will with no grace needed. Many saints fought against this doctrine. Saint David of Wales stands out among them especially, but it was Saint Augustine of Hippo, arguably the greatest of the Latin doctors, and the church's mightiest champion against heresy, who rose to fight against this inherently venomous strand of thought. Against Pelagius, St. Augustine upheld the truth that God's grace is entirely necessary for any movement of ours towards God to occur at all. As he himself puts it, we, for our part, assert that the human will is so divinely aided towards the doing of righteousness that, besides being created with the free choice of his will, and besides the teaching which instructs him how he ought to live, he receives also the Holy Spirit, through which there arises in his heart a delight in and love of that supreme and unchangeable good which is God. And this arises even now, while he still walks by faith and not by sight. Everything about Pelagius's teachings went against what the church wanted. They wanted and believed that people needed to be committed to God through them, but what this man was teaching was kind of going against that. This scared the church a lot because it was undermining their power to act as the medium for the average human being and God. Therefore, Pelagius had to be stopped. There's no record of him being executed, but we do know that at one point he had to flee Rome and go into hiding to continue his work. Number 4 on this list is Asmodeus. Asmodeus is actually a demon, and whether or not he is real can definitely be debated. But what can't be debated is how scared the church was of him. Grunge says the demon known as Asmodeus appears in the Book of Tobit, a Judeo-Christian book of the Bible that's either religious canon or apocrypha depending on which branch of Christianity you subscribe to. Asmodeus is said to be the worst of the demons. He doesn't hesitate to kill, and he has what has to be the lamest, most specific Achilles heel in the history of monsters. In the Book of Tobit, there's a young woman named Sarah who would very much like to be married. She becomes engaged, gets married, and then right before the sweet consummating, Asmodeus shows up and kills her husband. What might seem like a fluke quickly becomes a trend, as this happens to Sarah a total of 7 times. On lucky number 8, Sarah, who must have been an amazing conversationalist for this many guys to roll these dice, marries a guy named Tobias, who the Archangel Raphael gives the scoop on how to beat Asmodeus. The demon appears on the wedding night, and Tobias tosses a fish's heart and liver onto some coals, causing smoke that triggers Asmodeus' asthma or something like that. Asmodeus scampers off, and Raphael tracks him down, ties him up, and strangles him. So luckily for us, the text says that there's no more of Asmodeus, but that doesn't mean that his evil spirit doesn't still linger on. This is a demon that we're talking about here, and one of the worst ones ever at that. So I wouldn't be surprised if getting rid of this guy for good is a pretty hard thing to accomplish. Also, just a sidebar here, but poor Sarah, eh? This lady's just trying to get married and literally has to do it 8 separate times before one finally sticks. I think after marriage number 3, I'd personally just call it quits and get a puppy or something. Number 3 on this list is Beelzebub, another demon who is probably one of the most famous religious demons out there. Grunge says, Beelzebub, a demon with roots in old Philistine religions. His name comes up in the Bible a few times in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, and he may be a stand-in for Satan, but another translation of Beelzebub is Lord of the Flies. John Milton's theory, described in Paradise Lost, is that he's a lieutenant of hell, second in power only to Satan, which is what folks in the industry refer to as Resume Gold. The starring role of Beelzebub's career is probably his part in the Salem witch trials, in which he was blamed for inhabiting the bodies of the accused. For anyone riding the fence on whether or not there was any real justice to be had there, it's worth looking at the writings of Cotton Mather, a Puritan minister in the area at the time. In his work of Beelzebub and his plot, Mather wrote that there is a devil in a thing doubted by none but such as are under the influences of the devil. If Beelzebub was actually real, then he is responsible for the death of tons of people due to all of the witch stuff that went down. Not to mention just the trials, but what sort of stuff did he actually make these people do? It could be any number of things that we still don't even know about today. For obvious reasons, the church was not too fond of this demon, but it wasn't just the church. Your average everyday individual wasn't too fond of him at all either. Like, think about it. Back in the day, you would have to worry about having Beelzebub come and get you, and then you'd be put on the stake for being a witch if you did. Now obviously, these witch trials were not done even remotely how they should have been, and it's unclear whether or not Beelzebub did or didn't play a role in them. But still, it doesn't change the fact that you would have been worried about him if you were alive back then. Number 2 on this list is Arianism. Arianism wasn't a person necessarily, but a full-on train of thought by many different people that the church was extremely scared of. The Catholic gentleman says, aside from the various Gnostic sects that plagued the early church, it is in Arianism that is arguably the most famous of all Christian heresies. It struck at the very root and core of Christian teaching that Jesus was God himself in the flesh and relegated the person of Jesus Christ to that of a mere created thing. It lives on today in varying forms, from well-known sects like the Jehovah's Witnesses all the way to the bizarre world of Apollo Quiloboy. Moreover, it still lurks within the sentences of some modern theologians who ambiguously state that Jesus is the Christ, but no more than an exalted man. Saint Athanasius of Alexandria was the walking cure for this heresy. Stubborn and unshakable, I think it not a stretch to say at times that this great man stood alone against wave after wave of Arian attacks on the truth of the Christian faith. By emphasizing and stubbornly holding to the truth of Christ as both God and man, St. Athanasius effectively ended the reign of the Arian heresy within the church. At the root, Arianism is basically the thinking that instead of being born, Jesus was created by God. This obviously goes against a lot of what the church teaches and believes in, and therefore they weren't too fond of this thinking or anyone who thought it. Pretty much anybody back in the day who did wholeheartedly believe this was condemned as being a heretic, and some bad things would be coming down the pipe if that was you. And finally, number 1 on this list is the devil. This one seems obvious, but just because it's obvious doesn't mean that we shouldn't include it on the list. The devil has always been the one to blame for any evil that is plaguing the earth. A great famine takes the lives of thousands of people. The devil did it. Someone loses their minds and kills a bunch of people. They must have been taken over by the devil. My coupon for 20% off on Hot Wings expired a week ago. must have been the devil. Obviously, everyone was scared of the devil if he came for them. The church was scared of it, and the average person was scared of it. What is really interesting to me, though, is that the devil, even though he is horribly scary, is actually necessary to religion and the church. Without a devil, the only person to blame for anything bad happening would be God. The guy who's supposed to look out for us all the time would actually be the one doing all of the nasty things that happen to us, as well as all of the good things. Therefore, if we wish to believe that God is good and has our best intentions at heart, we sort of need to have a devil around to take the blame for all this stuff. It's just interesting to think that without the devil, one might be able to argue that we are the most scared of God. Not sure how I feel about that, but a cool thought experiment nonetheless.
Number 5, a time machine. Among the many conspiracies about what goods are hidden inside the Vatican's secret archives, one of the more popular and reoccurring ones is that the Vatican has access to wondrous technology hidden away from the rest of the world, from ancient civilizations, stuff like that. One leading theory is that among these devices is something called the chronovisor, an alleged time machine of sorts that allows the user to peer inside and see whatever time period in history or forwards they desire, like a little time camera. Doctor Who would love it. One Italian monk, one Pellegrino Ernetti, claimed that he developed the chronovisor at some point during the 1950s with a team of 12 esteemed scientists who all wished to remain anonymous in the process. I would put my name on that if I invented time travel, personally. I'd want people to know. The chronovisor is described as consisting of antennas and an unknown metal that's really good at looking through time, a little knob for tuning to a particular time and place, and a screen and recording device. Ernetti described that he and his team used this machine to view speeches by Mussolini and Napoleon, scenes from ancient Rome, and the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, which they allegedly tried to take a photo of. Now, obviously no one's seen the chronovisor. If such a device was to exist, it would naturally be pretty secretive. An Italian magazine in the 1970s claims that they found that image of Christ's crucifixion, the photo that was taken through time, only to discover that it was actually just a postcard. So this one's a bit up in the air. Let me know if you think this is real, but also, you know what? Let me know what time period you would want to take a picture of, if you could see that up close. And if you're looking for way more scary content, my friends, you already know Top 5 Scary is the place to be. We've got everything scary under the sun. Cryptids, conspiracies, true crime, fake crime, aliens, UFOs, just about anything freaky you can think of. So click on through, subscribe, stay scared, and don't miss a single thing. But keep watching this video too, okay? We worked hard on it. Number 4, the 3 secrets of Fatima. Over 100 years ago, 3 young people in Portugal from the town of Fatima claimed that they were visited by the Virgin Mary herself in a vision, and the Madonna shared with them wondrous prophecies and visions onto them. These visions, allegedly, were the Second World War, the rise and fall of communism, and the death of a pope. And these were referred to as the 3 secrets of Fatima. Very cool prophecy stuff. Now, story goes that the Madonna would visit these 3 shepherds every 6 months on the 13th day of each month on the dot. She was very punctual. Influenza would end up claiming the lives of 2 of these prophets, leaving only one to share messages with the world, and then only briefly too. Conspiracies and conspiracists state that the things the Virgin Mary told the shepherds weren't quite reported on accurately, and in truth, the church knows the real secrets that were bestowed upon the Fatimans, and that these were way too dangerous to be let out and had to be suppressed and controlled for fear of civil unrest, possibly pertaining to things that could damage the church's good reputation or change the nature of society as a whole. Maybe the answer as to whether or not that dress was white and black or gold and blue the whole time. An alternate conspiracy is that there were more secrets that the church knows about but refuses to share. Maybe 4 secrets of Fatima. That makes sense. They're called the secrets of Fatima, not the tell everybody's of Fatima. You want my theory? My conspiracy? Virgin Mary told those shepherds of Fatima the recipe for KFC and Coke, and the Vatican realized quickly that information is just too sensitive. That's got to stay under wraps. Number 3, proof of aliens. Well, we already talked a little bit about some of the incredible technology that could be inside this archive. And it's thought that the Vatican has all sorts of incredible information hidden away in its vaults that humanity, we're just not ready to know about. We're not grown up enough. One of the other leading ones is that theorists speculate that inside those secret archives is indisputable
hard evidence of extraterrestrial life, that they're harboring alien skulls and remnants of amazing technology, I guess on borrow from Area 51's collection it's traveling. So the story goes that in the late 1960s, during renovations of the Vatican's archives, excavators uncovered alien skulls beneath the Vatican archives, and somewhere the Predator is so upset that he lost those. Is it possible that they worried that if proof of extraterrestrial life got out into the wild, it would discredit belief out there? It wouldn't be the first time. Galileo was famously locked up for his wild beliefs about the celestial bodies that would turn out to be fairly true. So would aliens be any different, really a different story? A Russian engineer named Genrikh Markovich Ludwig was an esteemed scholar who in the 1920s was invited to the secret archives to study, a very prestigious position offered to less than 1,000 scholars a year. According to him, while there, he uncovered documentations that discussed the influence of aliens on civilizations like the Egyptians, the Mayans, the Mesopotamians. Ludwig found records of use of atomic weaponry predating the Manhattan Project, suggesting that this hyper-advanced technology had been in use for years, and humanity's leaps and progress were all reverse-engineered from our visitors. Maybe the pyramids really were aliens. Would certainly be something if that ever came out. I hope in our lifetime, I hope we get to see some aliens, and I hope we get to see an alien-elected pope someday. Personally. Number 2, proof Jesus never existed. Or did. Now, among the things that you would think the Vatican would really want to keep hidden and on the DL would be proof that the Lord and Savior did not exist. This is another popular conspiracy theory emanating about the Vatican, that one of the things they're trying to cover up is some alleged document that insists Jesus as we know him wasn't quite real or wasn't as reported accurately. That would make sense. If I was the Pope, that would be the number one thing I would want to keep under wraps, right? That would probably destroy the church overnight if that ever came out. Now, on the inverse of this theory is a similar theory, totally different direction though, stating that the Vatican's secret archives contains indisputable proof that Jesus did exist, including correspondences between St. Paul and Emperor Nero, history's favorite bad boy, contemporary paintings and depictions of the man, which would be pretty groundbreaking. You'd wonder though, if they have that, why would they keep that secret? I would leak that one. Now, if you believe this conspiracy and you can carry on with it, it does get a little wild. One author, Michael Bagnet, claims that the correspondences inside the archives, they prove Jesus did exist, but here's a crazy twist. He didn't die on the cross, as we all know, but rather there was a very complicated scheme with Pontius Pilate to secretly fake Jesus' death to appease the citizens of Rome. Sounds a little bit more like the plotline to a Dan Brown novel. It's a little fantastical, and if true, would probably be the greatest conspiracy theory in human history, and maybe humanity's most tightly guarded secrets if there's any weight to it. So definitely, if they knew that, they would probably keep that under wraps, keep that in a drawer, locked up tight, not let anybody see that. Number 1, the Illuminati. Maybe this is one of the most widespread conspiratorial beliefs, maybe one of the oldest conspiracy theories out there, really, is that the Illuminati, the centuries-old secret society that once started in Bavaria, would eventually grow into an organization capable of challenging the church and overtaking it. And if you believe the conspiracies, it's clandestinely pulling the strings behind everything, controlling the world from the shadows, inserting key members of its order into the highest levels of government, religion, the Disney Corporation, the rap industry, and also including their symbols hidden in everything. That one, I guess, just for fun, just to, flex. May I just say though, if the Illuminati are real and controlling things, they have got to be the least kept secret order, imaginable, since, I'm talking about them. Well, the conspiracy goes that the Vatican is closely tied with the Illuminati, with some believing that cardinals and the papacy are all tied to Illuminati interests, and that the secret archives contain bountiful proof of this: memos, meetings, plans for world domination, etc. The Vatican's archives date back centuries, nearly 1,000 years worth of old papers, with some documents containing secrets of the Knights Templar, who are thought to be the originators of Freemasonry, the group that would become tied with the Illuminati. That's who the Illuminati was based on. Surely some of those Knight Templar meeting minutes would be particularly illuminating, if you'll pardon that absolutely horrible pun. Of all the ones on this list, I think this one is the most
outright likely, since we know the Illuminati did stem from the Freemasons, and we know that there was a real Illuminati. That's an indisputable fact. And we know the Knights Templar. We know all of these groups did exist, and it's very likely that there are some secrets inside the Vatican's archive containing references to those three groups that could fuel the plot lines for the next 12 years of Assassin's Creed games. We got some good conspiracy stuff in there. Number 5. Sluagh. Our first entry on this list is something called a sluagh, which manifests as a bird, predominantly something like a raven or a crow. We all know corvids are the scariest classification of bird there is. It's Celtic in nature, which means almost certainly I am pronouncing that name wrong. It's probably something more like sluagh. They can take many forms, but prefer to do their hunting while donning the form of a corvid. What do they hunt exactly? Your soul. Your decaying soul, to be precise. These spirits seek out the dying, the weak, and stalk them, waiting like little carrion eaters. Not to worry, they also seek out the living too, waiting for the perfect time to strike. It's said that they seek out those who are experiencing heartbreak or intense emotional pain, so keep yourself in good spirits, I guess, lest ye be attacked by the demon crows. The best way to avoid them, I can't believe this is what it said, but I looked it up, is to keep your windows and doors shut. Cause you know, they are birds. Stay inside and never say their name. Well, I probably should have read that part first, I guess. Sorry. Lore says that these demons were considered so evil and heinous that they were actually banned from hell. Imagine that. I did not even know that was a possibility. I thought hell was kind of where you kept all the most cruel spirits, but I didn't know you could be too hardcore for it. Love the image of Satan looking up at these birds and being like, "Get out! Scat, you!" These creatures come from ancient Irish folklore, where they were first thought to be dark spirits, or just plain old evil entities. But as the years went by, slowly the narrative shifted that these birds were the souls of sinners and damned cast out of hell. In the early 1900s, these creatures were sometimes attributed to mysterious deaths around Europe, predominantly Ireland and Scotland. It was said that when petty criminals and ne'er-do-wells would turn up dead inexplicably, it was the handiwork of these birds. These birds, I got scared to say their name. I don't want to mess with it. I'm just gonna keep calling them these birds. These birds wait until your last tender moments on this earth, and when your soul is at its weakest, they swoop in and swallow your soul. What happens to a soul consumed by them? Well, I'm glad you asked. You become part of the flock, doomed to fly with them for the rest of time, feeding on other lost souls. But if spending eternity flying with a bunch of haunted ravens doesn't sound like your deal, I don't blame you. Why not spend eternity with the top 5 scary gang, and click through on the videos and watch forever and ever. Or maybe just an hour here and there. Toss a subscribe too while you're at it. Number 4. Jikininki. If you're familiar with the story of the Wendigo, and no doubt if you're watching Top 5 Scary, you're familiar with the story of the Wendigo because I can't go 3 minutes without shouting about the Wendigo, this spirit is very similar. It's sort of the Japanese Buddhist answer to it. The Jikininki are people who in life were terribly greedy, selfish, and now in death find themselves cursed to forever want more, to never be satisfied, and to also nefariously seek out human bodies to eat to satisfy their dark cravings. Yeah, I'm just gonna slip that one under the door. They stalk in the nighttime, scavenging for freshly deceased bodies and food offerings that have been left out for the dead. It's said that they loot the corpses that they eat too, which I'm gonna be honest, seems remarkably rude. I can understand eating the flesh of a dead body. You know, you're an evil spirit, we all gotta do what we do. But I draw the line at looting. It's a whole other thing entirely to root through their pockets for spare change. Folklore suggests that they use the loot they scavenge off of their victims to bribe city officials to leave them alone to their dark dealings. I knew politicians were corrupt, but I didn't know they took bribes from ghosts. Jinkies, that's a whole new level. It's said that the Jikininki look like decomposing cadavers, with inhuman features like glowing eyes and sharp claws. Interestingly though, some local variants of the tale suggest that they're able to disguise their true nature. They only take this demonic form during the night when they're hunting, and during the daytime, they're able to blend in like any other regular human, perhaps to help them scope out their victims. Should you ever cross a Jikininki, their eyes will be able to give it away, as you'll see the red glow behind their eyes. And when you do, you'll find yourself frozen in fear. Number 3, Popobawa. Now that name might sound deceiving, cause to be honest, it does sound just the littlest bit cute. But this thing is the farthest thing from adorable imaginable. This terrifying demon hails from the island of Zanzibar in East Africa. If you don't know Zanzibar, it's where Freddie Mercury came from. Look it up, you learned something today. Popobawa is Swahili for batwing, referring to the creature's most common form that it takes of a giant, vaguely humanoid bat creature. But the bat form is just one of its many appearances that it can take. A Popobawa can take on whatever it pleases, and is more of a shadow creature than anything else, preferring to dwell in the darkness in a sort of formless way. Now, a shadowy, shape-shifting bat creature would already be enough horrifying qualifiers to land this spirit in a top 5 list of scariest spirits around the globe, but it's this next little tidbit that really earns its spot on this list. The Popobawa specifically targets victims who don't believe in it. So, if you don't believe in Popobawas, you better start. You're in one. That's not really how that joke went. It's thought to be behind the cause of an outbreak of hysteria through Zanzibar in the late 90s, when there were several reports through village after village of men reporting that they had been attacked in the night by this demonic creature. It got so bad that eventually villagers would resort to sleeping outside their homes, out of a belief that the creature wouldn't attack someone outside their house. Maybe there's demon etiquette laws, I don't know. It's said that the Popobawa is hunting you if you can smell an intense smell of sulfur around your home. Mostly it comes out at night. Mostly. The way it gets you is particularly unpleasant. Instead of just eating you or slashing or doing something normal that a normal monster would do, the Popobawa crushes you during the night by sitting on you. Ha! People who claim they've been attacked say they wake up in the middle of the night with an intense pressure on their ribs and chest and have trouble breathing. It's been said that if you ever suspect you've caught the attention of the Popobawa, the best way to rid yourself of it is to spread knowledge and tell everyone everything you know, because after all, it goes after non-believers. Not that, that's why I'm telling you all this now. I've been sleeping really good. My chest is doing fine. Number 2, Vetus. I'd never heard of this demon before doing my little research for this video, and let me tell you, it's a regret of mine that I didn't know about it earlier, because my life has been improved since knowing about this thing. Vetus is a demon whose main goal and pleasure in life is to convert good, pious, righteous people into nasty sinners so they can get pulled down into hell. It's hard enough trying to live a life free of sin without demons also trying to trick me into damning my eternal soul. I already can't walk down the street without coveting 3 things in a window. Now I gotta deal with this? Luckily for me, Vetus probably wouldn't be terribly interested in me, since swaying me with sin is remarkably easy. He goes after priests, members of the cloth, people of devout faith. It's like his job to take charge of the really tough cases to tempt towards sin. He's a master of deception, seduction, trickery, bribery, intimidation, and a whole lot of other nasty demon business that probably looks good on his Tinder profile. Where he gets kind of wild though is that apparently he only ever talked in rhyme, which was supposed to help him lull you into a sense of comfort that causes you to trust him and makes you more likely to sin. I don't know about rhyme making me sin. Feels like what they said would happen if I listened to rap music. Besides his freestyling bars, Vetus is a shape-shifting demon capable of taking whatever form he pleases, but he prefers to take forms that are wooden in nature, like a cursed tree or something, for example. He's also depicted as often having many limbs, growing outwards and fractal like a spider might. Most insidiously about all that Vetus does is that he stares deeply into your soul and sees your deepest, darkest, most sinful desires, meaning he has definitely read my Frasier fanfiction. Vetus then, with his conjuring and shape-shifting, makes your desire manifest in reality, where he can tempt you with sin up close and personal to see just how truly committed to the path of the righteous you are. And finally, coming in number 1 at the list is Moloch. Perhaps you've heard the name before. Moloch is an old god, real old, like Old Testament old. Moloch takes the form of an impressively sized deity with the head of a cow or bull instead of man, and usually he has his arms stretched outwards towards a fire in most statues or paintings of him. This is because this was his preferred method of sacrifice. Whatever you were to offer him, usually human, were to be cast into the flames for Moloch's pleasure. He's thought to be a pagan fertility deity, mentioned across various religious texts and worshipped by the Canaanites. Moses forbade the Israelites to worship Moloch, as he was a false god. Moloch quite enjoyed sacrifices and being paid homage, and it's said that this was always to appease his wrath. In Paradise Lost, the epic poem that fleshed out much of what we know and think about hell, Moloch was described as being a fallen angel and one of Satan's greatest warriors. This depiction paints him as a bloodthirsty soldier of hell who is eager to spur a war against heaven's forces, and he is worshipped as a deity specifically to anger God above. Sounds like he makes lovely company. Number 5, Pazuzu. Our first terrifying demon up on this list has made quite the career for himself in pop culture. He's picked up some small gigs here and there. He's serving as a sort of mascot of sorts for the real fake band Gorillaz, multiple cameos on Futurama, and won some acclaim for his star-studded role in The Exorcist, possessing Regan and making us all afraid of pea soup. Although his real historical background is far more interesting than any of his pop culture appearances. Pazuzu has been around for a long time, first being recorded as a Babylonian demon wind god, who was always playing both sides, so he'd come out on top. He was a god of wind, and it was thought that the wind ravaging, storms, and locusts were all byproducts of Pazuzu's rage. But he was also thought to be a protector. He would protect the home, taking a particular liking to watching over pregnant women. He was an incredibly destructive force in nature, and when it would come time to throw down, Pazuzu would fly across the world, breaking the wings of other demons to prevent them from getting into any trouble. Sort of like a demonic Batman. His portrayal in The Exorcist is probably where most people know him from and assume those things about him, where he's seen as a much more plain Jane possessing demon, lacking his impressive wings and other traits, and not doing a whole lot of flying around or anything with the wind, focusing a lot more on projectile vomiting and harassing a couple of priests. The real Pazuzu is a lot cooler than his Exorcist appearance, but no doubt more people know about that than they do an ancient Babylonian wind god. I don't think I'd like to spend much time with either incarnation face to face, and those priests definitely didn't want to either. Now ghouls, goblins, lend me your ears, and subscribe if you wouldn't mind. Number 4. Belphegor. Now another demon who's had his moment in pop culture. Maybe you recognize Belphegor from Supernatural's first fledgling season, all the way back when the boys were wide-eyed and hadn't even died once yet. Or maybe if you're a Persona fan, you recognize Belphegor as the perpetually bored demon on the can. It's a video game with a talking cat. And you play as a guy who's got a healthy sleep schedule and can manage his social circle well. It's not a game focused on realism. But it turns out, doing a little research, there was a reason for this foul demon's appearance. One of the 7 princes of hell, the demonic icon of sloths' favorite offering isn't blood or a fresh goat, but a little mud pie, feces if you want to get scientific with it. Look, I'm not going to judge, and I'm not going to ask what he's doing with it. Old lore just says that if you wanted to summon Belphegor, you had to bring him a lot of feces. There's no metric volume ever listed, just a lot. If you do summon him, he'll trade you wondrous riches, expand your ability to discover new things, expand your consciousness, but at the cost of the temptation of your mortal soul, and you'll also probably never be able to wash your hands clean again. I'm sorry, I don't usually work so blue. It's the lazy man's comedy, although perchance that's fitting for the demon prince of sloth. Belphegor has been depicted in all manner of ways over the years, appearing sometimes as esoteric things like tree branches, or sometimes taking the form of beautiful women. But one wood carving in the 18th century of him sitting on an 18th century John sealed his fate pretty much forever, and then since then, he's almost always been depicted as a horned demon sitting on a throne of sorts. Belphegor, I want to make something clear here. I'm not making fun of you. I'm trying to make sense of all this. Number 3, the Legion. Now, this next demon is a tiny bit of a cheat because although it's supposed to be a top 5 list, I'm about to make it a top 500,000 list. This next demon is known as the Legion, for it is many. The Legion's first documented recording is from the Gospel of Mark, where Jesus Christ encountered a man possessed by a demon. When he spoke to the man in an effort to exorcise him, he asked for the name of the demon inside him, and the man responded, Legion, for there were many devils inside him. Upon being exorcised from the man, the Legion asked if it could instead be transferred to a herd of pigs, which he then obliged. Now the Legion is pretty atypical when it comes to demons. It's not the prince of anything, it's not the manifestation of any one sin, and it's not any one thing at all. The Legion is made of countless demons that all function together in unison like a hive mind. When one has a thought, the rest of the Legion obeys. When one member of the Legion speaks, the rest of them speak all at once. Now sometimes the armies of Satan are referred to as the legions of hell, but I guess the Legion is a separate thing altogether. It must make filling out forms very difficult. No one's really sure what sort of demons the Legion are, or what they look like even. It's just agreed that there's a lot of them all working together on their common goals. Like I said, no one really knows what they look like, but if you've ever seen a horde of, anything all in one place, you can't imagine that it would be anything pleasant. Now the Legion isn't as much of a pop culture starlet as some of the other demons I've mentioned on this list, but that doesn't mean that it's influenced things in pop culture. The phrase Legion for we are many appears in all sorts of different things, probably because it's just a very cool way to describe yourself. A recurring boss fight in the Castlevania video games called Legion appears as a writhing mass of bodies, no doubt inspired by the story. And the character in Mass Effect named Legion is an AI life form comprised of thousands of individual AI working in tandem, who directly references the story, introducing itself, saying, "We are Legion, for we are many." And while I'm on it, Legion was the entire best character in Mass Effect, but that's neither here nor there. Sleep easy, big guy. Number 2, Beelzebub. Now we're getting into the big hitters. Beelzebub is thought to be one of the first angels to have ever fallen to hell, alongside Leviathan and Lucifer himself. He and Lucifer actually have a bit of an identity crisis, as the two are sometimes thought to be interchangeable. They must have similar haircuts. Some demonologists argue that Beelzebub is another name for Lucifer, and some others pose that he's one of his most trusted lieutenants. But whatever Beelzebub is, everyone can agree that he's pretty horrifying. His history is fairly interesting. It's thought that his namesake is a mockery of the god Baal, an ancient Bronze Age god of fertility. Some scholars believe that Beelzebub's name comes from Baal-zebub, translating to Lord of the Flies, inferring that the followers of Baal are nothing more than flies worshipping a dung god. They didn't get the memo that Belphegor was the dung god. The Lord of the Flies sort of ended up becoming Beelzebub's title, with almost all depictions of the demon featuring flies in ubiquitous amounts around him. Occasionally he's even depicted as a giant fly. It's very Kafkaesque. Beelzebub is said to be one of the most powerful demons inside of Hell's domain, capable of great control over humanity, able to tempt them. Beelzebub was cited during the Salem witch trials as the entity that had corrupted and swayed so many women to witchery. Now there's some discrepancy as to what sin Beelzebub is thought to preside over, with some offerings saying that he represents pride, some others saying that he represents gluttony, which I would say probably seems a little more fitting for a fly demon anyway, and he's most commonly associated with gluttony. Number 1, Asmodeus. Yeah, it probably would have made a lot of sense to have Lucifer as the number 1 spot on this list. I mean, he's the king of hell and all that. So let's just take this moment, give him an honorable mention, and say he's at the number 0 spot, just because I thought it was a little obvious, and I'm pretty sure you know who Satan is, and there's other demons we could talk about, bring up some unknown ones. So filling in at the number 1 spot is Asmodeus, one of the princes of hell and the embodiment of the cardinal sin of lust. Asmodeus fell from heaven alongside the other fallen angels, reforming as a prince of hell. Asmodeus is said to have been married to Lilith, the primordial she-demon, famed for her banishing from the Garden of Eden and famed for destroying Fraser Crane. Lilith was cursed and banished for her defilement and depicted as a temptress, and Asmodeus saw all that and was like, "Hey girl, I'm into all that stuff. You want to procreate an endless stream of demons into the world and reign over a dominion of chaos?" And the rest is wedded bliss. Depictions of Asmodeus vary pretty wildly from case to case. Occasionally he's drawn as a handsome young fella, but most commonly he's depicted as a squat, vaguely humanoid creature with a rooster leg, the tail of a snake, 3 heads, comprising of a bull, a goat, and a scruffy demon head as the center. Asmodeus presides over lust with the help of his beloved Lilith, and the two tempt humans with madness and desire to ruin people with lechery. Somehow this wasn't enough for Asmodeus though, as some stories also describe Asmodeus as having command over the betting halls of hell and is responsible for tempting man's souls towards gambling. So what I am hearing from this is that Asmodeus probably parties harder than any demon out there. Number 5, Mammon. There's nothing wrong with wanting a little, right? It's nice to want. Nothing better than having a little money and power. For most of us who weren't born into a Fortune 500 lineage, it might be a little bit tricky unless you got a little bit help. Maybe like from Mammon, the embodiment of human greed. He's actually a lot more generous than his position as greed demon might suggest. You don't have to do too much. If you just give over your eternal soul and pledge yourself to an eternity in his service, he might reward you with great riches. That's a pretty solid transaction. Mammoth is thought to originate from an ancient word for wealth, and it's thought that this is where Mammon was first born from. He was mankind's inherent desire for wealth and greed, twisted out of subconscious want. The Gospel of Luke and Matthew both directly quote this, saying, "You cannot serve both God and Mammon," meaning you can't have a pious life and also find yourself on a quest for massive wealth, and later taken literally to mean you can't serve one of the 7 princes of hell if you worship God. Mammon is greedy. Makes sense? He's real greedy. It's said that of all the archdukes and princes of hell, Mammon is more concerned with staring at the gold pavement than any of Lucifer's rebellion or business of the heavens. taken to mean that Mammon doesn't really concern himself with anything that doesn't involve cold, hard coin. He is on that grind set 24/7. The Demon of Greed has taken many forms over the years, with his most consistent depiction being that of a fairly normal-looking humanoid, looming over his subjects in a giant golden throne, looking down on those who would call for his aid. He's also associated with a wolf, and is believed to be able to take the form of one for his dealings on Earth. It's said that part of the arcane ritual to evoke Mammon's spirit is to imagine your spirit as a golden wolf calling out to him. If you do invoke Mammon, just be sure you're being reasonable with what you ask for. You never know what happens if you get too greedy. Abbaye. It's said that when the rebellion began, Lucifer fell from heaven and was cast out alongside the other fallen angels. Well, who were the lesser-known fallen angels? Abbaye is an obscure demon, but a threatening one nonetheless, and a very difficult name to pronounce. In the Testament of Solomon, the demon Abbaye introduces himself as a threat to God's will, and anyone who serves God. Abbaye rules over some dominions of hell, serving as one of Lucifer's trusted lieutenants. He was originally an angel, but unhappy, and when cast out with the rest of them, fell to earth, disfigured and vengeful. As he fell out of the kingdom of heaven, the other angels desperately grabbed at his wings to try and retrieve him. But instead of restraining him, the process ripped his wing from his back, leaving Abbaye with a singular, dark, monstrous red wing. Although, I doubt he minds much, because to be honest, that sounds sick as all hell. It probably works really well for his demon aesthetic. Abbaye presides over the pits of Tartarus, a unique dimension in hell originating from Greek mythology as a depth of the underworld. Abbaye is a powerful sorcerer, boasting to King Solomon that he's far superior to the prophet Moses in every way. He brags of his sorcery and magic, being able to shift ideas and human perception in his favor, conjuring miracles, wonders, and form signs to humans, and is even able to bestow his gift to humans in exchange for favor. Abbaye takes a particular personal pleasure in torturing God's servants out of his twisted malice for the heavens above. Thankfully, Abbaye's cruelty was his undoing. When Moses parted the Red Sea, Abbaye wanted to be there to see it in person, or in demon, I guess. When the Red Sea closed yet again, Abbaye was trapped inside a pillar of air, but Beelzebub is confident he will return again. Number 3. Samael. Samael is one of the more interesting entries on this list, namely because depending on the text cited, he's either an archangel of heaven or a fallen angel serving in hell. Angels to some, demons to others, and all that. He's often referred to as the original Grim Reaper, and is thought to be where depictions of the Soul Collector stem from. Samael across most texts is known as the Angel of Death, a title that precedes itself. I mean, you hear the Angel of Death and you know I probably should not be messing with that guy, because I'm pretty sure they also call John Wick that sometimes. It's said that on the hour of a person's final release from this mortal coil, Samael will descend upon them, wings extended and sword drawn, dripping at its tip the poison that takes your life. Samael's name actually translates to Venom of God, again, in case you're wondering just how nice this guy is. Samael is known as the Accuser, the Seducer, the Destroyer, and a Midnight Joker. Samael's role as the Seducer is an essential one to the kingdom of heaven. He's seen as good and evil in the same measure, but he is only serving God's will. Tempting mankind is Samael's lot in life. It's been said as well that Samael is the one who planted the tree of knowledge and was the serpent who tempted Adam and Eve to bite the fruit. When Abraham was tested by God to sacrifice Isaac, it was said that Samael was the one who whispered into their ears to disobey. It's said that his ultimate goal is to bring an end to death itself, including the very concept of it. Once he's finished his ultimate mission, he'll be annihilated himself, and with death undone, his mission complete. Number 2. Mephistopheles. Imagine you could make a deal for whatever you wanted, no matter how outrageous the request. Power, influence, romance. If all it took was your soul, would you do it? Well, that's the offer Mephistopheles is prepared to make you. One of the most sinister servants in hell, Mephistopheles, or Mephisto as he's sometimes referred to, is one of Lucifer's right-hand men. Responsible for bargains and deals involving human souls, Mephistopheles takes a great sickening pleasure in luring wayward souls downwards to the underworld. If Mephistopheles has already made himself present to you, I'm afraid it's already too late to you. He doesn't go out of his way to corrupt and tempt the innocent the way other demons do, but rather he finishes the job for those who've already begun to falter on a path they can't return from. In some instances, Mephistopheles' role changes slightly. Sometimes he appears to trick people into damning themselves. In others, they're already damned and he's just finishing off the inevitable. Most famously is the legend he originates from, where the bet he places with Faust for his soul, the protagonist of the ancient German legend, who made a deal at a crossroads with Mephistopheles. In exchange for ultimate power and the servitude of Mephistopheles while Faust lives, when he passes, Faust's soul will become the property of Mephistopheles and he will enslave him and damn him for eternity. Faust got what he was promised, and the terms Faust and Faustian now became synonymous with hard bargains out of this legend. Mephistopheles knows that he's essential to the cycle of the world. He knows that as much as we hate him, we need him. He tells Faust that he's part of the dark chaos that gives birth to the light. Sure, he's offering people in exchange for eternal damnation for mortal goods, but he is inspiring people in his own twisted little way. He's trying to get you to do better so you won't hear him knocking. Number 1. Leviathan. As far as demons go, who's a bigger threat than the Leviathan? I mean, how could there even be a bigger threat? Leviathan, it's in the name. Just let that sit in your mouth for a bit and think of something big. Leviathan is thought to be the embodiment of the sin of envy, and he is one of the princes of hell, and the grand admiral of hell's armies. It's tasked with pushing man towards temptation and the sin of heresy. Leviathan manifests itself as a behemoth of a creature, an incomprehensibly large sea serpent that would make H.P. Lovecraft blush. It's said to have impenetrable armored scales all over its body, and has monstrous claws as well, capable of destroying anything it would ever have to battle against, should that ever arise. It's said that it can conjure up mighty bursts of flame from its chest like a dragon. Leviathan serves as the gatekeeper of hell, with the mighty demon's very jaws serving as the gates to the underworld themselves. Said as well that Leviathan's own flesh makes up the foundations for the walls of hell, and it feasts upon souls that attempt to escape the underworld. Foolishly, of course. As far as demonic power levels go, making up the literal corners of the underworld have got to count for something. How many demons can claim to be so hardcore they practically are hell? I can see why he's such a trusted lieutenant. Number 5. St. Mary the Virgin Church. Clop Hill, England. I gotta say, that sounds like it's a fake place, like where Sir Topham Hatt lives. Well, not only is it real, but it's home to a bone-chilling haunted church, St. Mary the Virgin Church. Now, St. Mary was built in 1350 outside the main settlement of totally real place Clop Hill. Traditionally, churches are built facing the east. I didn't know that. It's so it can align with the sun rising, which in Christianity is associated with heaven and the Messiah. Churches have their altars facing east, so you pray in that holy direction. Well, St. Mary's just had to be a little different, and this church is facing the west, facing away from God. And it's why some people believe the church is hosted to evil spirits, as facing west means they've shunned God and opened their doors to the devil. Paranormal investigators have strongly suspected the church as being host to satanic rituals. As the church fell into disuse, it became a popular spot for vandals, and if you believe the legends, black magic. In 1963, a local couple saw 2 people wandering around holding a human skull, which definitely I think would cause you to look twice. The people told the couple that they had found the skull in St. Mary's, where it had been jammed into a wall. When the couple went to investigate, they found on the floor a breastbone, pelvis, and leg bones, all laid out in a pattern used for black mass. Pretty spooky. Scattered cockerel feathers and tracings of 2 crosses filled in red were found inside the church as well. And as if that wasn't slightly unnerving enough, they also found that 6 graves of women in particular had been tampered with as well. All signs seem to be pointing towards some dark rituals happening at St. Mary's Church. Common sightings at the St. Mary's Church range from smaller scale things like strange screeching during the night or hearing the bell going off despite being long abandoned, and the more threatening reports seeing tall, dark figures wandering the ruins of the church, perhaps getting themselves ready for another ritual, or perhaps they've been contacted by a ritual and are arriving. Only thing I know is I won't be checking out the midnight mass there anytime soon. And if you're interested in way more scary stories of all manners, cryptids, conspiracies, churches, hauntings, aliens, we've got a little bit of everything at Top 5 Scary. So click on through, find something to get cozy with, and subscribe, and make sure you hit that bell so you catch all of our videos as they drop. But do all that stuff at the end of this one, okay? Because we got way more haunted churches for you coming right up. Number 4. Our next entry on the list today is going to be the Aquia Episcopal Church. And if you haven't said that, try saying that 10 times fast. I dare you. Located in picturesque Stafford, Virginia. The church has 200 years of history to it, which means it's also got approximately 200 years worth of ghost stories to study. When the church was first built way back when in the 18th century, it was stained by an unfortunate tragedy. You see, the surrounding areas were exhausted by war and the lack of resources, food and money, and as such, brigands would take to the dark country roads to attack innocents during the night for whatever they had on them. Well, one young woman was hiding from a gang of highwaymen and marauders and sought out the church as a safe haven. Unfortunately, the bandits eventually caught up with her and she met an untimely end. Now, these men were never caught for their crime, and her body was not found for hundreds of years, left there to rot and decompose. And many believe that because of this, her spirit is tied to the church. And there have been several reports of hauntings ever since the discovery of those accursed bones. Visitors mention hearing footsteps frantically scattered around at night. These footsteps break into a run, but if you go searching, you'll never be able to find anyone attached to them. Voices can be heard in the room where she was attacked, some saying it sounds like a call for help or a painful scream of a struggle. Some go so far as to say they saw a transparent apparition of the woman in the church's windows or on the balcony. One story comes to us from a custodian who worked the graveyard shift there in the 1990s, claiming that he saw a ghostly woman's face floating above the graces, and says that he saw her smiling at him through the balcony windows before she vanished. One last one on this church. In the 1990s, to celebrate the bicentennial anniversary, the church sent out an invitation to a group of Civil War reenactors to fight a mock battle on its ground. During the night, one of the reenactors was complaining that there was a red and orange light that was flickering the entire night during the church that prevented him from sleeping. The man explained this to the father of the church, and the father explained back that there was no electricity in the vestry, and that the light must have been the spirit confused by why the Civil War had started up again. Imagine, you're a ghost, you're already out of time, and then you look outside and you see guys from your time? My little ghostly sense of the world would be so thrown off. I would have to buy a new ghost calendar. Number 3. Monaster Nagayal de Duff, or Abbey of the Black Hag if you don't got all that time. Wow, you see that? You see what that church is called in that little chyron below me right now? I'm just supposed to pronounce that with my lips? Okay, it's also called the Abbey of the Black Hag, and that's what we're going with. We're not calling it that other thing. I'm not doing that. Black Abbey of the Hag, only name this church has ever gone by, and it was built in 1298. And it was one of the well-known medieval convents in Old Ireland. The remains of the abbey still stand today in a secluded valley, making it already mysterious and supernatural place just that much more supernatural and overgrown and spooky. I mean, the place is called the Abbey of the Black Hag. You don't name a place that unless it's extremely haunted or if there's like a cool boss fight or something there. Sounds like it's straight out of Dishonored. It's believed that the last abbess, horrible word by the way, in charge of the abbey practiced witchcraft, and in the scary way, okay? She brought death, misfortune to the surrounding areas. Pope Martin V condemned the abbey, not being down for witches at all. The accused witch left to live out in the damp, deserted abbey by herself, which she probably loved because it sounds scary. Over time, her skin blackened, her hair furled, and her soul twisted, leading to the place being renamed the Abbey of the Black Hag. And if you can believe it, there's actually more to this one. The Count and Countess of Desmond once called the abbey home when attempting to flee their attackers, where the Countess was fatally struck by an arrow and buried by her husband. But it wouldn't be the end of the Countess, because sightings of a ghostly figure around the ruins of the abbey were common, meaning someone eventually went to dig up that grave, finding worn out finger bones, meaning she was still alive when she was buried. It's said now that a woman's panicked shrieking can be heard in the early hours around the abbey. Number 2. The Borley Rectory. The Borley Rectory is an old London estate that has the unique distinction of being considered the most haunted building in the United Kingdom. No big deal, or anything. Almost immediately after its construction, stories of hauntings started to creep out. One of the first local legends says that in the 12th century, a priest and a nun had a naughty little affair, and when they were discovered, the nun was bricked up and left to rot in the nearby church. Since then, they say that her spirit roams the rectory. In 1900, 4 daughters of the then estate owner all said that they saw a nun wandering around the estate late at night. They tried to talk to her, but got no response back, just a scary ghost stare. The family claimed they had seen this nun around the property, and on one occasion they thought they saw the spectral apparition of a horse-drawn carriage with a headless rider, some real Sleepy Hollow stuff. From there on, there was all these reports of bizarre sounds or strange shadows creeping out the corner of your eye. In 1927, the estate changed hands as the original family owning the estate had all passed on and a new family, the Smiths, had moved in. Shortly after, they discovered a human skull in the cupboard in a brown bag. Which is not a great housewarming gift, to be honest. They reported poltergeist behavior, unexplained footsteps, lights flicking around them, and the same sightings of headless specters. Now they only lasted 2 years, not being down for any of the hauntings or skulls in cupboards, any of that business. And the next family, the Foysters, didn't have much better luck. They had objects flying around their home and on one occasion claimed their daughter was attacked by something truly horrible. They moved out as well. And the last owner of the rectory would be Captain Gregson, who accidentally lit the estate ablaze while unpacking, although insurance claims they think the fire was started intentionally, perhaps in a desperate attempt to cast away whatever evil has been trapped in the Borley Rectory for so long, or perhaps he unintentionally unleashed it out into the world. Time will tell. At number 1, Mortemer Abbey. Mortemer Abbey is a monastery in the forest of Lyons, France. A real old church built in 1134 on marshland, near the stagnant water of the drainage lake. The monks dug it out to try and dry the marshy land around the Fulbrock stream, which was called the Dead Pond. In French, Mortemer, which is where the name comes from. You can kind of hear it there. Mortemer, you know. Perhaps it's this history of being built on a dead pond is why Mortemer Abbey was doomed to be haunted. Now the abbey flourished for centuries, but over time started to become claimed by the passage of time, and it fell into decline and disrepair. In the 17th century, there was an attempt to try and rebuild the abbey and recapture its former old glory, but the decline was already pretty present and had set in by that point, and by the time of the French Revolution, only 5 monks still remained in the abbey. Eventually, the abbey would collapse entirely and go private, and in 1863, the abbey would find itself in the hands of a rich Parisian family, the Delarue. Mr. Delarue moved his wife and his sons into the abbey, but soon discovered they weren't the only tenants. While walking the lawns, the young people of the house saw a light from the library. As if by an invisible hand, these hatches unfastened, their handles turned, and the windows and doors all opened. The paintings on the inside of the abbey turned themselves around and steps thundered out into the halls, and nobody moved out immediately after. I would have started looking for new real estate right then and there. But one night the young Delarue, Charles, had his fiancée over to come see the estate that would become her new home in marriage. She was offered the guest room, but found herself terrified during the night when she couldn't sleep because she was too busy being tormented by mysterious sounds and objects around the room that were hurling themselves around, being possessed by something. Having had, quite frankly, enough, like I think any of us might have, the young suitor announced she would never live in this house, called off the entire marriage, and hurried back to Paris tout de suite, where there were plenty of handsome young men asking her hand in marriage who didn't live in old haunted estates, okay? That's the message to take away from this. Get the love you deserve, and the love you deserve is not in a haunted house.
In 5th, we have the Most Holy Trinity Church in New York, built sometime between 1882 and 1885 on land that previously served as a graveyard until 1853. According to local rumors, not all of the bodies residing there were exhumed from the graveyard, and the spirits of those left behind still inhabit the grounds to this day. The church property covers an entire city block, and it is said that there are false closets leading to bricked-up doorways, tunnels, and random sub-basements throughout the church and convent. There are also mysterious passageways on the upper levels of the church, where legend says only priests are able to enter. The church's rectory was built in 1872 by its second pastor, Monsignor Michael May, who later passed in his room on the second floor. Priests who live in the rectory have used that space for mainly a guest room ever since, as no one has ever been willing to live in it on an ongoing basis. Guests have experienced lights being switched off and on, hearing strange noises, and the sound of a person walking back and forth while trying to sleep. Phantom footsteps have also been heard on the staircases in the building, and dogs who were once kept as pets in the rectory would stare in a trance-like state down the basement stairs, as well as into the dining room when the building got cold. In 1897, a parish bell ringer named George Stell's life was taken in the vestibule of the church. Though there was a suspect in the case, a former parishioner who would later be executed for an unrelated ending of life, no one was ever convicted of the crime. The red fluids of Mr. Stells, as well as the red handprint of the killer, is believed to still be on the wall in a stairway leading to the bell tower. George's ghost still roams the church and is believed to be the reason why the bells will ring suddenly, vowing not to leave until his death has been solved. Moving on to our fourth place position, we have the Aquia Church of Stafford, Virginia. While the congregation was established in 1711, the physical parish wasn't built until 1751. It was a gorgeous brick building built on a peaceful hilltop with a 2-story crucifix floor plan, which otherwise known as a cruciform, which was considered a rather unusual style for colonial churches. Aquia was built to replace 2 earlier sites of the Overwharton parish, which were constructed around 1680. The inside of the church burned down in 1754 and was not rebuilt until 1757. It was then shut down from the Revolutionary War until the Civil War due to lack of funding, before reopening as a stable, campsite, and hospital for Union forces. It was during this closure that a young blonde woman was traveling the dark country roads, rural Stafford County, when a group of highwaymen accosted her. This time period was full of exasperated uncertainty from the war, and with it a severe lack of resources, food, and money. Men would wait hidden on the side of roads to steal the valuables from people walking or riding by their hiding spots. She ran from the men to the sanctuary of the church, but was only able to hide for a little while before they broke inside and ended her life. Her body was hidden in the tower, and the men were never caught. It wasn't until after the Revolutionary War ended in 1775 and the church was ready to reopen for services that what was left of her was discovered, a skeleton with golden blonde hair that was as intact as if she had been freshly slain. The red fluid that spilled on the floor from her death was impossible to remove. Despite using every trick known to man, the stains remained in the tower for well over 100 years, until during a modern renovation when the redness was covered up by concrete. With the facility still being in use today, members of the church have mentioned hearing footsteps walking around at all hours of the day and will break into a frantic run around the church at night, but no one is there. Noises can be heard in the empty tower, with some saying it sounds like a struggle, others describing a groan, whistle, or even a call for help. Many have also mentioned seeing a transparent woman in the church's windows, on the balcony, or even in the graveyard, dubbing her Blonde Beth after the hair of the skeleton. In the 1900s, brave people would try to stay overnight at the church, but were chased away by what they described as an unfriendly presence. A custodian working in the graveyard saw a ghostly woman's face floating above the graves, while another man saw a woman smiling at him through the balcony windows before she vanished. In the middle of this creepy sandwich, in third place, we're taking a closer look at St. Mary the Virgin, located on the outskirts of Clophill, England. Originally built facing the west sometime around the year 1350, it's believed to have been erected on top of a leper hospital run by monks. I'd like to take a moment to note that it was built in the quote-unquote wrong direction, with churches traditionally facing east, the direction from which the sun rises, which is associated with the location of heaven and the return of the Messiah in Christian religion. Altars inside of these holy buildings would face in the eastbound direction for prayers. Some have claimed that because St. Mary the Virgin faces away from God, it thus opens its doors to hell, and ergo responsible for the tale I'm about to tell. The building was abandoned in 1848 when the rector at the time made the decision to have a new church built, instead of expanding the previous one, which was much needed due to the rapidly growing congregation. Old St. Mary's, as was dubbed by the locals, was then primarily used as a mortuary chapel, holding bodies before they were buried in the adjacent cemetery. By the 1950s, St. Mary's had become so run down that it could no longer fulfill that use, with just the outdoor walls and tower remaining. In March 1963, the tomb of an 18th century apothecary's wife was broken into, and the bones were arranged ritualistically in the middle of the church. And once again on Midsummer's Eve of 1969, multiple women's graves were broken into, with bones being removed and rearranged once more. While the specific individuals involved in these acts were never identified, the arrangements found resembled those used in black mass rituals performed by satanic groups at the time. After the first incident in 1963, a rare decision was made to rehollow, or in more simple terms, re-bless the altar that was left in the building, in a failed attempt to protect the building from evil. Later that year, Reverend Harold Colthurst reported stumbling upon a group of men in the building that were in the midst of a mysterious ritual, being quoted as saying that the men were trying to communicate with evil spirits, chanting some sort of mumbo-jumbo. They were definitely in league with the devil. Modern-day visitors to the now landmark have reported seeing a plethora of ghostly figures during the day and nighttime, faint lights moving about before vanishing mysteriously, along with reports of a chilly and oppressive atmosphere even during warm days. In second place, we're visiting L'Abbaye de Mortemer, or Mortimer Abbey. It was originally built in 1134 on land gifted by King Henry I. The stagnant water of the drainage lake, which was dug out by the monks to dry up the marshy land, was called Mortemer, or the Dead Pond, giving the monastery its name. Totally not ominous or anything. The monks constructed what was then one of the largest monasteries in the world on said land. The legend says that after the passing of his only son, King Henry wanted to reform his daughter Matilda and had her locked in a room in the abbey for 5 years. The anger and hate she felt from being sent away and isolated stained and seeped into the walls of the monastery, cursing it for eternity. After her eventual release, she went on to live until 1167, when it said her spirit returned to Mortimer Abbey to haunt the area as the White Lady. She is said to appear on nights close to a full moon, moaning as she drifts through the now ruins of the monastery. Those that have seen her report that she alternates between wearing black and white gloves. If she appears to you with white gloves on, you're destined for good luck. But if she appears with black, you'll be expected to pass within a year. Alas, Matilda is not the only spirit one must worry about if visiting the abbey. When the monastery was at its peak in the 1500s, a frail and suffering woman was brought to the monks with an illness it was believed that only they could aid. It was revealed that she was possessed by the spirit of a wolf and cursed to become a werewolf for several nights. The monks chained her to a room and conducted multiple exorcisms in an attempt to eradicate the spirit. The monks were able to exorcise the evil wolf spirit or demonic force out of the woman, but it then attached itself to the grounds and walls of the monastery. Several hundred years later, in 1884, a man named Roger Saboureau was hunting in the woods nearby when he was attacked by a large werewolf. He shot it multiple times, killing the creature, but when he returned home at dawn, he found the body of his wife bearing wounds matching those he had given the wolf. People say the spirit of Roger's wife and his own heartbroken spirit still wander the area when the moon is full. The abbey was exorcised by the church in 1921, but still remains haunted to this day. And coming in first place, we have the Abbey of the Black Hag, locally known as Monasterngalagduff. Please don't curse me for my pronunciation. St. Catherine's Abbey, or simply as Old Abbey. It's located roughly 2 miles east of the village of Shanagolden, in the townland of Old Abbey. Gee, can you tell where it got its name? One of the earliest recorded nunneries in Ireland, with its first official record being around 1298, it was built on land donated by John Fitzthomas, and has the typical layout for abbeys of its time, with a dining hall, cells, isolated meditation areas, and other rooms still able to be identified amongst the ruins today. During the 15th century, there was a major battle for supremacy in the area between the Earl Fitzgerald and the prestigious Butler family, of which the Earldom of Ormond belonged. It got to such an extent that the local bishop was known to pray for peace between the families at masses. During one of the nightly attacks, Earl Fitzgerald attempted to get his wife to safety, but as he was pulling her onto his horse, an arrow pierced her thigh, shattering the bone and spraying red bodily fluids. As he rode on, the Countess appeared to have succumbed to her injury, leading the Earl to seek sanctuary at St. Catherine's. The heartbroken man was certain his wife had passed, so he swiftly buried her beneath the altar and continued elsewhere to find safety. As the night went on, the nuns and residents began to hear hair-raising screams and made the decision to rebury the Countess in hopes of bringing her peace. When they dug up the body, they discovered her fingers were broken and her nails had been torn off. The poor woman had been buried alive, with a very slow and torturous end of her life. To this day, it is believed that the Countess has been unable to find peace and continues to scream in anguish, waiting for her husband to save her from a fate truly worse than death. Moving slightly ahead in time, we come to the Black Nun herself. Described as one in the order that wasn't content with being humble, helping others over herself, and the servitude to God, she instead craved power. The hag had her own cell, where she worshipped Satan and performed black magic, becoming a slave to the occult. This was the highest form of blasphemy in the church, and the other nuns in the order fled the abbey, while the hag remained in her now house of darkness. To complete her rituals, the Black Nun would venture into the local community and perform depraved, lewd acts and offer sacrifices, with bones of young community members later discovered on the grounds. In modern times, visitors have reported seeing the dark, shadowy figure of a nun wandering, the feeling of being constantly watched, and a disembodied hand reaching towards them. It has been reported that flashlights cannot function in the nun's cell well, and modern batteries drain too quickly to have any sort of rational explanation.
Number 5. St. Clair's fingernails and her hair. Now, some people say that fingernails and hair continue to grow after the body passes away. This is commonly repeated, but actually not true, because rather it's the skin around the fingernails retracting that gives the illusion that the fingernails are still growing. I thought I would just toss in a totally unrelated fun fact you can use at a party. These fingernails aren't growing at all, because they're not attached to anybody, and they're kept in a glass box alongside some of St. Clair's wonderful curls, like the world's worst and possibly stinkiest time capsule. Now, St. Clair was often overshadowed by her more famous mentor, Francis of Assisi, but St. Clair was her own woman, accomplished in her own right. She founded her own order of nuns, the Poor Clares. Inspired by Francis's teachings when she was a teenager, she renounced the world and founded an order based on the ideals of extreme poverty and contemplation. I should probably look into this order because being extremely broke and contemplating being extremely broke is about 99% of what I do. The order spread popularity and houses of Poor Clares were established far away from her home convent in Assisi. Now, it's said that part of what made St. Clair's decision to give up the worldly life so inspiring was that not only was she blessed to be born into a family of great wealth, but oh va-va-voom, St. Clair was a real stunner. Now, you know, the depictions we have to work with may not look like much, but they called her the first Jenner for her luscious lips and flowing locks. As proof of her devotion, Francis trimmed her beautiful extravagant hair as a physical manifestation of rejecting her former vain existence. As you can see, I'm not quite there yet. I'm still quite happy with my vain, disgusting hair. Now, someone down the line managed to get a hold of St. Clair's hair and fingernails. Maybe they were just sweeping the barber room floor. These treasures, for lack of a better word, were kept and encased in a reliquary at the basilica named in her honor. This also contains a rock crystal flask with her fingernails. Really not sure why anyone felt they needed to keep that. I'm not sure how holy these are, but hey, I'm not a saint or a bishop or a pope or any of that stuff. I'm just a YouTuber and I'm barely that even. But if you want to hear more of me narrating some of these strange and peculiar parts of the big globe we share, Top 5 Scary is the place to be. We got a little something for everyone. So make sure you click on through, like this video, subscribe, and hit that little bell, and we can keep on bringing you screams every single day, twice a day, and then some. But do that at the end of this video, okay? We got way more weird Catholic relics coming up for you. Number 4, papal hearts. You know, they say some people wear their hearts on their sleeves, and some people collect 22 hearts in marble urns inside a beautiful reliquary. We all have our hobbies. We all collect things. Just make sure those hearts are still in their original packaging, otherwise, you know, they're totally worthless. Well, these aren't just regular old hearts. These are the hearts of 22 former popes. Obviously they're former popes if their hearts are, obviously. At the Church of Santi Vincenzo e Anastasio a Trivia. Oof, that's a mouthful, we're not saying that again. You can find the sealed hearts of 22 popes in marble urns for all to appreciate. The popes are listed to the left of the altar, with the oldest coming in all the way from the 15th century with Sixtus V to the fresh and still beating heart of Leo XIII in 1903. Now, this custom of separating a pope's organs from the corpse sounds a bit strange, or a bit Egyptian, like they might mummify them. And then this process was called praecordia, and was done to prevent decay while funeral arrangements were made, and just to test a little bit if they were worried the Pope was going to reanimate. The tradition started up in the 14th century when it was established that when a Pope passed away, they would be mourned for 9 days. 9 days, with suffrage massages being said each day. They borrowed this little schedule from the Byzantines, who observed deaths of their emperors in a very similar manner, really taking a while off. They took a whole pay period to mourn the loss, and then you dry those tears right up, get back to work. Now, this was all the rage for popes of yesteryear, very trendy, very in fashion. But Pope Pius X in 1914 had a change of heart when he expressly forbade it in his burial and will. He said, "Don't do any of that weird stuff to me." Those were his exact words, if you can believe it. Now, since then, his successors have all agreed and have all done the same. But who's to say? I feel this could be coming back in fashion. Pope Francis, how you feeling? You gotta listen to your heart on this one. Number 3, the Holy Souls of Purgatory. Purgatory, in Catholic belief, is kind of like a giant waiting room while the upper management figures out just where exactly they're going to find a good spot that's best for you. Well, that's simplifying it a bit, obviously. The soul is thought to be stranded in purgatory until it atones for its earthly sins, but you can hurry the process up just a little bit if your loved ones back on earth are praying for you. In the back of the Chiesa del Sacro Cuore del Suffragio del Piccolo Museo del Purgatorio, or Museum of the Holy Souls in Purgatory, holds a collection of relics that have been singed by the hands of the souls of those trapped in purgatory. These burned handprints are believed to be the souls trying to communicate that their loved ones need to pray harder. I don't know about you, but I would definitely start praying real hard if burned handprints started showing up in my books, but I would be praying for an exorcist, more likely. Now, this is kind of interesting, and I didn't even know this. Purgatory isn't even mentioned directly in the Bible, but the concept of purgatory dates back to the 11th century. This notion that trapped souls needed to be freed came from a story told to the Abbot Odilo of Cluny by a monk returning from the Holy Land. He told this story about how this ship had been wrecked, that he'd been cast ashore on a mysterious island, and a hermit who lived on the island related his own story of a chasm from which screams of trapped souls and demonic flames rose and ravaged. He told of how the demons would complain about losing souls when your loved ones would pray for their behalf. So November 2nd was established as All Souls Day. Everybody, all the souls. Where it was believed that prayers by the living could help get all of those trapped dead in purgatory loose. You know, it's kind of like that one episode of The Simpsons where the town comes together to get Bart out of the well. It's a similar enough concept, you know. They sang a song, you pray, souls get out, Bart gets out, pretty much one and the same. This particular collection of burned relics in particular, though, was collected when Victor Jouet, the missionary behind the collection, experienced a fire that burned part of the original suffragio, leaving behind a scorched image of a face that he believed was a trapped soul. Now, again, just me personally, but if I saw a face burned into one of my possessions, I would move entirely, call an exorcist, be putting salt circles around my feet for the rest of my life, but I appreciate what he did too. Number 2, the Santa Maria della Concesione crypts. Whew, my Italian is not as good as it should be. Inside the Santa Maria della Concesione crypts, as many as 4,000 friars lie here. Well, lie is probably the wrong word, as they hang here is probably a more accurate description, as these 4,000 bodies are hanging from the rafters, decorating the space of every inch of the church. Now, it might seem a bit grim or beautiful, depending on your twisted point of view. We're a scary channel, I ain't gonna judge you. There's a certain chic to it. But I wouldn't be surprised if they have to spend a few hundred a month on keeping air fresheners and incense just running all the time there. Now, you might reasonably be wondering, hey, why do they hang bones from the wall like they're throwing a Halloween party and no one went to the store to get actual decorations and they had to make do with what they had? Well, they're not just festive. The practice dates back from the 16th century when the Capuchin friars, not named after the monkey but because of the hoods they wore, left the friary of St. Bonaventure to come live at Santa Maria della Concesione. They were ordered by the Pope's brother at the time to bring the remains of deceased friars with them to their new home so that all the Capuchins could lie together. With a huge amount of bodies on their hands, the brothers decided to get a little fun with it and decorate the walls of the crypts with their bones as a way of reminding them that death comes for all of them. Surely there's a slightly easier way to remind you of the ever-present mortality that hangs over us than literally hanging a bunch of pelvises to the buttresses, but what do I know? A plaque in the crypt reads, "What you are now, we once were. What we are now, you shall be," which is grim. No way around it. The crypt contains a little bit of everything inside you. Crypt of skulls, lovely load of leg bones, and the star of the show is definitely the crypt of pelvises. Oh, make sure you get a photo in there. Make sure you grab a fridge magnet from the Pelvis Room gift shop. And number 1, St. John the Baptist's many heads. They say 2 heads are better than 1, which might be proof of what a great man St. John the Baptist is, because no one can seem to agree how many heads the guy actually had. The saint's head was supposedly brought back from Constantinople in 1206 by the crusader Wallen de Satan, but it seems this happened more than a few times, since 3 different shrines across the globe all claim to have the original head of St. John the Baptist, and no one's able to clear this up anytime soon. St. John was a forerunner of Jesus Christ, and the New Testament says that John was beheaded by Herod around 28 CE as a punishment for criticizing his recent divorce. Yeesh. Paintings of the beheading depicted on a silver platter, which is a nice Nice way to get a severed head, I think. I don't know if I ever want a head delivered to me, but if I had to, I would want it on a silver platter. According to the legend, there really was a silver platter his head was delivered on that made its way to Constantinople or Istanbul, but was sold by the Crusaders in order to pay for his travels back. John's head was on display in the Amiens Cathedral up until the French Revolution, where they confiscated all church treasures, and it would eventually return home in 1816, then going all the way back to Rome from Greek monks who brought it to a shrine decorated with beautiful stained glass, one panel depicting the head on a silver platter. You think you wouldn't want to remember that? Well, here's where the trouble comes in. A German museum in Munich also takes great pride in having St. John's head. The Munich Residence Museum contains a bunch of other holy relics, but their most prized is the alleged St. John's head, although no one really knows how it got there. This skull is wrapped in cloth and heavily interred with gems. Now 2 would be impressive, but St. John's got a crowd worth of heads because he's got 3. His last head can be found in Damascus, Syria in the Umayyad Mosque, one of the oldest and largest mosques in the world. This relic, also not exposed, wrapped in a cloth, and is currently located in a shrine dedicated to the saint. So will the real John the Baptist please stand up? Or do all 3 of these heads actually really belong to him, and he had to be beheaded 3 times for it to take? You know what, don't answer that. I'm not sure if that's something I really want to know.
Kicking off this list in 5th place, we have the possibility of proof of alien life. In 1998, news reports emerged that strange, elongated, distinctly alien-looking skulls had been found during a restoration of the Vatican Library, with many suggesting that the Vatican secret archives must be hiding evidence of extraterrestrials. Perhaps an understanding between the Vatican and extraterrestrials is too far out there, too convenient to contemplate, except the Vatican itself does not run from ties to aliens. Consider the words of Cardinal Conrado Balducci, a high-ranking Vatican official since the 1960s and close friend to many popes, who in 1998 instructed followers to remember a paragraph of the New Testament where St. Paul refers to Christ as King of the universe, not only as King of the world. That means that all beings in the universe, including aliens, are reconcilable with God. Heck, the current pope has said he would baptize an alien, so I guess that's progress for the church? You tell me. In 4th place, we have Conscience Court. Yep, the Vatican has a secret court for sins based on conscience. Not proof, not evidence, but absolution from conscience. Bishops who handle such hearings are the Apostolic Penitentiary, also known as the Tribunal of Conscience. Created by Pope Alexander in 1179, it was a secret to the public until 2009. Wow, a secret they kept from the general public? Consider me less than surprised. The sins judged in this court vary from spitting out the desecration of a communion wafer to priests breaking their vows of celibacy. Spitting out communion's a sin? News to me. I can think of a lot of icky priests that should go to real court for how they broke their vows, not a court where they're simply forgiven. Sinners who seek absolution have to write a petition to the Holy See. They use pseudonyms to protect their identities and submit the petition to the tribunal. The tribunal considers the matter, but the decision-making lies with the major penitentiary, and if he is uncertain, then he submits the matter to the Pope. Until about the 18th century, heinous crimes such as ending lives and fornication against will were judged by the tribunal. Sure, let's give Father whatever his name is a slap on the wrist so he can have a clear conscience about breaking serious laws and go back to his biggest concern about having a perfect life after passing. Because that's the priority for serious crimes. Same with using a fake name for protection. Really great. In 3rd place, time to talk about exorcisms. While I'm sure someone out there is chuckling, exorcisms are nothing to be taken lightly. They're a religious or a spiritual practice of evicting demons, jinns, or other malevolent spiritual entities from a person or an area that is believed to be possessed. It varies a bit from religion to religion, so bear with me while I specify how it works in the Catholic Church. In Catholicism, exorcisms are performed in the name of Jesus Christ. There's a distinction between major exorcisms and minor exorcisms. Minor exorcisms are included in some blessings in which priests create sacramentals such as blessed salt. A related practice is deliverance ministry. Now, the distinction between deliverance ministry and exorcism is that exorcism is conducted by priests who are given special permission from the Catholic Church, while deliverance ministry is prayer for people who are distressed and wish to heal emotional wounds, including those purposefully caused by evil spirits. The Catholic rite for a formal exorcism, called a major exorcism, is given in section 11 of Ritual Romanum. The ritual lists guidelines for conducting an exorcism and for determining when a formal exorcism is required. Priests are instructed to carefully determine that the nature of the condition is not actually a psychological or physical illness before proceeding. Sure, I'd love to see their criteria. In Catholic practice, the person performing the exorcism, known as an exorcist, exorcist must be an ordained priest. The exorcist recites prayers according to the rubrics of the rite and makes use of religious materials such as icons, sacramentals, and holy relic. The exorcist revokes God, specifically the name of Jesus Christ, as well as saints of the Church Triumphant and the Archangel Michael, to intervene with the exorcism. According to Catholic understanding, several weekly exorcisms over many years are sometimes required to expel a deeply entrenched demon. St. Michael's prayer against Satan and the rebellious angels, attributed to Pope Leo, is considered the strongest prayer of the Catholic Church against cases of diabolical possession. The Holy Rosary also has an exorcistic and intercessory power. Cool, maybe I'll go get my rosary one of these days. Holy water is a common aid for exorcism. Its use belongs to the prayer to St. Michael. The chief exorcist of the Vatican, Father Gabriel Amorth, stated that he had performed tens of thousands of exorcisms over his 60+ years as a priest. Oh my gosh. Additionally, popes have performed exorcisms. Father Amorth states that in 2009, Pope Benedict slammed Satan out of 2 guys, and in 2000, Pope John Paul II attempted to exorcise a woman, but failed to do so. Father Amorth later witnessed the possessed woman crawling up the walls like a spider. Interesting? In Roman Catholicism, exorcism is a sacramental but not a sacrament, unlike baptism, confession, First Communion. Unlike a sacrament, exorcism's integrity and efficiency do not depend on the rigid use of an unchanging formula or the ordered sequence of prescribed actions. Its efficiency depends on 2 elements: authorization from valid and illicit church authorities, and the faith of the exorcist. Ever since the rise of the popularity of exorcisms in the movie of, similar name, the church has tried hiding that they still practice them, but we know better. Number 2 on our list is the Vatican Bank. Yeah, totally not suspicious at all. Buckle in because there is a lot to unpack here. Formerly known as the Institute for the Works of Religion, the Institute, or the IOR for short, was founded in June 1942 by papal decree of Pope Pius XII. Guess when they presented their first public operations report? Nope, not 1943. Try again, I'll wait. Nope, not even in the 1900s. 2013. Yeah, you heard me correctly. 70 freaking years later, they produced their first annual report. The thing that's supposed to be presented every year so no one does anything shady or illegal. Previous to this, all internal ledgers were destroyed every 10 years in accordance with their policy. So did they exist or not? The IOR's role is to safeguard and administer property intended for works of religion or charity. The bank accepts deposits only from top church officials and entities, and is run by a president but overseen by 5 cardinals who report directly to the Vatican and the Vatican Secretary of State. So they only report to themselves. For reference, all banks that operate in Canada have to report to the Minister of Finance. Former bank president Ettore Tedeschi and the Vatican Bank have been investigated on 2 separate occasions for money laundering. Yeah, nobody saw that coming. In March of 2012, JP Morgan Chase closed a Vatican account in Milan after the IOR was unable to respond to questionable money transfers. In 2010, Italian authorities seized $30 million from a Vatican account at Italy's Credito Artigiano Spa following allegations that the IOR violated anti-money laundering laws. Ettore and the bank were both denied wrongdoing, and no charges were ever filed. The money was released after IOR promised to pass measures to come into full compliance with international standards on money laundering and terrorism financing. Yeah, those measures, as of 2023, still have not been passed. In September of 2019, German Cardinal Reinhard Marx, who was in charge of the Vatican's Economic Council, confirmed that Pope Francis had instructed him to reduce costs in an effort to eliminate a deficit that is estimated to be around 70 million euros. Don't get excited. That's not a concrete number from them, because that would be, too transparent. The exact amount is up for debate because the Vatican has not published a budget since 2015 and has been without an in-house auditor for 2 years. Pardon me while I slowly blink here. The Vatican enjoys a property tax break for all non-commercial properties containing a chapel. So using this loophole between the years 2006 and 2011, the Vatican evaded taxes that amounted to about 4 billion euros. The European Court of Justice ruled this illegal, and the Vatican had to cough up 4 billion euros as post-dated tax. Sure, because every normal organization has that kind of money just lying around. The Vatican did not entirely pay for evading taxes, and it's argued that if you take into account the taxes they evaded dating back to 1992, the total amount's going to be over 13 billion euros. That's right, billion. On the 28th of June in 2013, 3 people were arrested by the Italian police on suspicion of corruption and fraud, having planned to smuggle 20 million in cash from Switzerland into Italy. One of those people arrested was Monsignor Nunzio Scarano, previously senior accountant at APSA, the Vatican's administration of the Patrimony of the Apostolic See. Try saying that 5 times fast. In January of 2014, he was further charged with money laundering through IOR accounts in yet another investigation. I'm seeing a pattern here. Are you? According to a police statement, millions of euros in false donations from offshore companies had moved through his accounts. Already in July of 2013, the IOR had frozen the money in his accounts. In July of 2016, Nunzio was acquitted of allegations of corruption, but was given a 2-year sentence after being convicted of lesser charges of making false allegations. His money laundering trial in his hometown of Salerno was still pending at this time. The other person arrested was a bank person and a former Secret Service agent. In February of 2017, a court in Rome convicted 2 former top Vatican bank officials, Paolo Cipriani and Massimo Tullioff, for omissions in communications involving 3 small transfers. Paolo was a former Vatican bank director, and Massimo was his former deputy. They were, however, acquitted of a more serious money laundering charge, which involved $60 million in transfers, and were sentenced to 4 months and 10 days in prison. They were also forced to return $6,000 each. Oh, so glad they had to return so much of that money. In 2018, Vatican prosecutors indicted former Vatican Bank president Angelo Caloia and an attorney, Gabriele Liuzzo, for embezzling $62 million and using a real estate scam between 2001 and 2006. Oh yeah, totally a safe bank to put money in. And in first place, we have some unethical history German stuff. Thanks to guidelines, I have a lovely dictionary of words I cannot say, so I'll try to give y'all a little list right now. Yahtzee gonna represent a group that carries about, a very distinct flag, and evil dictator Schmiedler is their leader. But I'll just use evil dictator or cruel dictator. I hope y'all can follow along, because things are about to get dicey. Remember that bank I just talked about? Yeah, time to get even more in depth. A filed lawsuit claims that during the dictator's reign, Vatican Bank received at least 200 million Swiss francs from his puppet Utasha regime, money that his followers allegedly looted from groups of people they set out to eliminate. The class action suit, headed up by attorney Keelan Friesen at Minneapolis law firm Zimmerman Reed, involves 2,000 plaintiffs who are seeking an accounting of purported funds as well as restitution that can amount to around $200 million. The claim also names, unidentified Swiss, Austrian, Argentine, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, and German banking institutions, where plaintiffs' lawyers say some of the plunder may have been routed to help the war criminals escape to Argentina. The suit relies on once classified documents from various countries that have been made public in recent years, as well as a 1998 US government report issued by Commerce Undersecretary Stuart Eisenstadt. Some of the report's most damning evidence appears in a 1946 intelligence memo from a US Treasury agent named Emerson Bigelow, who states that the Swiss francs were held in, you guessed it, the Vatican for safekeeping. The Vatican has constantly denied allegations of receiving Yahtzee gold and said in its internal review that they showed no trace of such funds. Sure, I'm totally gonna trust the internal review from a bank that destroyed their records for 70 years before going public. One of the reasons the Vatican has been criticized is that it refuses to open its archives as others have done. A key figure in helping the Utashi was Krunoslav Draganovic, a Croatian priest who was head of the College of San Girolamo in Rome. Men from Croatia who wanted to become priests lived at San Girolamo while studying for ordination. After World War II, the college served as a safe house for the Usashi underground. It is alleged that Draganovic had aided the military and civilian leaders who had been in power in Croatia and committed war crimes. His assistance consisted in obtaining false documents and safe passage out of Italy. People write that there are allegations that he used his Vatican Bank connections to launder gold stolen by, you guessed it, and that he was paid for his cooperation. He admitted in a 1945 that he had personally moved 40 kilos of Utashi gold to Rome, concealed in 2 packing cases. A request made under the Freedom of Information Act resulted in the 1997 release of Bigelow's report. Criminal conduct described in the report led to the institution of a 1999 lawsuit against the Vatican Bank. Criminal conduct described in the report led to the institution of a 1999 lawsuit against the Vatican Bank filed by survivors and descendants. The lawsuit was dismissed in 2009 under terms of the Sovereign Immunities Act. Although the legal case no longer stands, moral questions surrounding the plunder remain. Yeah, I've got a few questions of my own. Now, ever since allegations concerning the Vatican Bank and the Croatian plunder became public, requests have been made to the Vatican to allow access to archival documents from the time of Pope Pius. Pius was Pope from 1939 until 58, and if there's anything, it would be found on documents from his papacy if they still exist. According to Gerald Posner in God's Bankers, following tradition, documents relevant to Pope Pius could have been made public on March 12th of 2014, 75 years after his election as Pope, but you guessed it, the date passed without any release of those documents. At a 1997 conference on looted Yahtzee gold in London, the Vatican was the only one of 42 countries that rebuffed all requests for archival access. At a 1998 restitution summit in Washington, it ignored an emotional plea by U.S. Secretary of State and stood aside as 44 countries approved an ambitious plan to return, icky looted art and property, settle unpaid life insurance claims, and reaffirm the call for open access to that time era archives. Subsequent pleas for opening the files by Bill Clinton, the State Department, and other organizations went unanswered. Enthusiasm over a 1999 Vatican announcement to allow Jewish historians into the wartime archives was short-lived. Access was limited to 5,000 documents that had been selected and published years earlier by 4 hand-picked academics.